Before we drift away, don't forget to like the video and subscribe for more calming sleep stories. Sweet dreams await. The forest loomed, thick and dense with trees that whispered in the wind, their branches like gnarled fingers reaching toward the sky. Rain had begun to fall, soft at first, then heavier with each passing minute, drumming against the ground and leaves. Through the mist, the faint silhouette of a lodge appeared, standing isolated among the towering trees. You'd received the invitation a week earlier. A simple letter, no return address, just an old-fashioned script that read, "Come to the lodge in the forest. The fire awaits." Curious and drawn by the mystery, you'd followed the address on the letter, though you never could shake the strange feeling that settled deep in your chest. Now, standing before the heavy wooden door of the lodge, you felt it again, the pull. The door creaked open before you could knock, as if expecting you. A dim light flickered from inside, casting eerie shadows across the darkened porch. The air was thick with the smell of wet earth and pine. You hesitated. But the invitation had been so cryptic, the mystery so inviting, that you couldn't turn back now. With a deep breath, you stepped inside. The warmth hit you immediately. A crackling fire burned in a stone hearth, the flames dancing wildly, casting long shadows across the walls. An old chandelier, its crystals hanging from darkened wood, shimmered softly above you. The air smelled of wood smoke and something else, something faint but familiar, like the scent of old books, of forgotten things. "Welcome," a voice called from the shadows. You turned, startled. A tall figure, draped in a long cloak, stood at the far side of the room, near the window. Their face was hidden, but the glint of their eyes was unmistakable, sharp, calculating, waiting. For a moment, the silence between you stretched, and the fire crackled in the background. "You came," the figure said again, a slight smile curling beneath the hood. "Now let us begin." The figure stepped forward, their cloak sweeping across the floor like a shadow. The warmth from the fire seemed to intensify, and for a moment, you felt a strange sense of calm wash over you, as though the heat of the flames could keep whatever might lurk outside at bay. But there was something unsettling about the way the light danced on the walls, shifting as if the fire itself had a life of its own. "Please sit," the figure said, gesturing to a nearby armchair. The leather was cracked, weathered by time, but inviting. Reluctantly, you lowered yourself into it, the old wood creaking beneath your weight. Your eyes never left the figure, who now seemed to loom larger in the flickering shadows. The figure's voice was low, almost a whisper. "The forest has its secrets, you know. Secrets that the world has forgotten." They paused, as though waiting for you to respond, but you could only stare, unsure of how to react. The words hung in the air, thick with the weight of something ancient. "You felt it, haven't you?" the figure continued, their voice slipping between the cracks of your thoughts, like the wind through the trees outside. "The calling, the invitation, the lure of the unknown." You nodded slowly, your mind swirling with the growing unease that had followed you since you'd stepped foot into the forest. The figure's eyes gleamed in the firelight, almost glowing, and they stepped closer, so close you could feel the coolness of their presence despite the heat of the flames. "This place, this lodge, it is not what it seems. It is a doorway, a threshold." Their words slid like velvet, dark and enticing. "And you, like so many before you, have crossed it." Your heart raced. The invitation, was it really just an invitation? Or was it a trap, a carefully laid snare designed to pull you deeper into something you couldn't escape? The more you thought about it, the more you realized that the forest outside, the one that had drawn you in, might not have been as innocent as it seemed. The figure reached into the folds of their cloak, producing a small wooden box, intricately carved, with symbols you couldn't quite decipher. It was old, the wood dark with age, and when they placed it on the table between you, you could hear a faint ticking sound, like the distant ticking of a clock, though you couldn't see a mechanism. "Inside this box," the figure said softly, "is the truth, the real reason you're here. But be warned, the truth is not always what it seems." You stared at the box, the urge to open it clawing at you, but something deep inside held you back. Was this the moment when everything would change? When the real nightmare would begin? The fire crackled louder, and the shadows in the corners of the room seemed to stretch and sway as if they were alive. You could hear the faint rustling of leaves outside, the wind growing stronger, the sound of the forest calling to you. Or was it calling to the figure? To both of you? The figure's lips curled into a knowing smile, as though reading your thoughts. "You've heard the stories, haven't you? About the cursed woods, the lost travelers, the ones who ventured too far and never returned. But what if I told you that the truth was far more complex?" They leaned in closer, their voice dropping to a whisper. "The forest doesn't just take people. No, it changes them. And that is what you must understand. Suddenly the room seemed colder. The warmth of the fire, the security you'd felt just moments before, began to fade. The lodge, once a place of refuge, now felt more like a prison. The walls seemed to close in, the shadows deepening. The fire flickered, casting strange, distorted shapes across the room. Shapes that almost looked like faces, like figures moving just beyond the reach of the flames. The figure pulled back, their smile widening as if they enjoyed watching your confusion. "You feel it, don't you?" they said, their tone not quite sympathetic, but almost amused. "The change. It's already begun. You stepped into something much darker than you realize." A sudden chill ran down your spine as the ticking from the box grew louder. It was unmistakable now, a rhythmic, insistent sound, like the ticking of an old clock that had never stopped. You found yourself drawn to it, your fingers twitching as if to open the box, to see what lay inside. But before you could move, the figure's voice stopped you. "Not yet," they said, holding up a hand. "First, you must understand. The forest does not forget, and neither does the lodge." You swallowed hard. "What does that mean?" you asked, your voice trembling slightly. The figure leaned back, their face now completely obscured by the shadows of their hood. "It means," they said, "that the forest has been waiting for someone like you. Someone who is ready." "Ready for what?" you asked, barely able to force the words out. The figure's eyes gleamed once more, a spark of something ancient and knowing flickering in the dark. "Ready to join the lodge," they said softly, their voice echoing in the silence. "Ready to become part of something far older than you can imagine." The wind outside howled against the windows, and for the briefest moment you thought you saw something huge, something dark, moving just beyond the glass. The figure didn't wait for you to speak. They simply stood up, the hem of their cloak swirling around them like smoke. "Come," they said, and before you could react, they turned toward the door. "It is time to see what you've truly come for." And as they opened the door to the forest, the cold wind swept in like 1,000 whispers. You stood there, the truth dangling before you, and realized that stepping through the door might be the only way to understand what you had gotten yourself into. But something deep inside warned you, once you crossed that threshold, there would be no turning back. The door swung open, the creaking hinges sending a shiver down your spine. The wind that rushed in was sharp, biting through the warmth of the lodge like a cold whisper from the forest itself. It carried with it the unmistakable scent of damp earth and moss, but also something darker, a faint metallic tang like iron that made your stomach tighten. The figure stepped into the doorway, turning to face you one last time. "This is the moment," they said softly, their voice barely audible over the wind's howl. "Step into the forest and you will begin to understand. But be warned, the forest does not share its secrets lightly." You stared at the path ahead. The trees stretched high into the sky, their branches intertwining above, forming a canopy that blocked out most of the moonlight. The only light came from the faint glow of the fire behind you and the occasional flicker of lightning that illuminated the edges of the forest, casting long, distorted shadows on the ground. The figure did not wait for you to decide. They stepped out into the darkened woods without hesitation, their form vanishing into the night. The door to the lodge slowly swung shut behind them, leaving you standing alone on the threshold. Your heart pounded in your chest. Every instinct screamed at you to turn back, to flee into the warmth and safety of the lodge. But something, the same pull that had led you here in the first place, compelled you forward. You stepped outside, the cold air biting into your skin as you ventured into the forest. The path beneath your feet was soft, the ground soggy with recent rain. The trees around you loomed like silent giants, their branches creaking in the wind, but there was no sound of animals, no rustling of leaves except for the wind. It was as if the entire forest was holding its breath, waiting. The figure ahead of you moved with purpose, never pausing, as if they knew exactly where they were going. Their form was a shadow against the darkness, but there was something unsettling about their presence. The cloak they wore seemed to absorb the light around them, making them blend into the surroundings as if they were part of the forest itself. As you followed them deeper into the woods, the air grew colder, and the oppressive silence became heavier, more suffocating. The sound of your footsteps was the only thing that seemed to break the stillness, the soft crunch of leaves and twigs beneath your shoes. "You must understand," the figure called back to you, their voice floating in the wind like a distant echo. "The forest changes those who enter it, and the lodge, it binds them. You'll see. Soon you'll see for yourself." You could feel their words like a weight pressing down on your chest, but you didn't speak. There were no words to say. The trees around you seemed to close in, their trunks gnarled and twisted, the bark rough like the skin of some ancient creature. They seemed to move ever so slightly, as if the forest itself were alive, watching, waiting. The figure stopped abruptly, and you nearly walked right into them. You barely had time to react before they turned to face you, their eyes gleaming in the darkness, glowing faintly like embers. "Look around you," they said, their voice now lower, almost a growl. "Do you see it?" You looked, but all you saw were trees, shadows, and the faint glow of the fire from the lodge, now distant behind you. The forest stretched endlessly in every direction, its darkness swallowing everything. But then, you noticed something. The trees were not just trees. There were faces, faint and almost imperceptible, carved into the bark, twisted, agonized expressions that seemed to shift as you moved your gaze. At first, they were barely noticeable, just shadows among shadows, but as you stared longer, you realized they were no illusion. "They're watching," the figure said, stepping closer, their voice now almost a whisper. "The souls of those who have come before you. Lost, trapped, unable to leave." A shiver ran down your spine as you pulled your gaze away from the grotesque faces. You had heard the stories, whispers about travelers who had ventured into the forest and disappeared without a trace. But now, standing in the heart of it, you understood that those stories were more than just tales. They were warnings. Warnings you had ignored. "Why are you telling me this?" you asked, your voice barely above a whisper. The figure smiled, but it wasn't a reassuring smile. It was cold, calculated, as if they had anticipated your fear. "Because you need to know what you're up against. The forest doesn't let go of those who come seeking answers. And the lodge, it's not a place of rest. It's a place of change." Suddenly, the wind picked up, howling through the trees like a living thing. The temperature dropped, and you felt a strange pressure on your chest, as though the very air around you had thickened. A low, rumbling sound began to vibrate through the ground beneath your feet, deep and primal. The figure's eyes glinted, reflecting the faintest traces of moonlight. "It's beginning," they said softly. "The forest is waking. It knows you're here." Before you could ask what they meant, the ground shifted beneath your feet and you stumbled, almost falling. The path ahead of you seemed to change, twisting and turning, as if the forest itself was rearranging, reshaping. "You've crossed the threshold," the figure said, their voice now serious, almost warning. "There's no going back now. Not unless the forest allows it." Your heart raced as the air grew colder still. You could feel something, a presence, moving through the trees, something massive, something ancient. The branches above you swayed, and the ground trembled ever so slightly. What is that?" you gasped, your breath catching in your throat. The figure turned slowly, their face obscured by their hood. But you could feel their smile, cruel and knowing. "You'll see soon enough," they said, their voice almost lost in the wind. "But first, we must reach the heart of the forest." And with that, they began walking again, their cloak flowing behind them like a shadow, disappearing into the darkened woods. You hesitated for a moment, fear gnawing at you, but you had no choice. You followed, deeper into the forest, where the trees whispered and the darkness seemed to stretch forever. The deeper you ventured into the woods, the more suffocating the atmosphere became. The air, once crisp and cold, now felt heavy, as though the very forest was pressing in on you, its breath slow and deliberate. The path, which had seemed clear at first, twisted and turned in unnatural ways, its edges blurred by the thick fog that began to creep in. Each step you took seemed to echo longer than the last, as though the forest itself was responding to your every move. The figure in front of you moved with eerie precision, their steps never faltering. They didn't speak, but the air around them seemed to hum, as if some unseen force radiated from their presence. You tried to steady your own breath, but the chill in the air and the growing sense of dread made it difficult. The darkness around you pressed closer, making the distant moonlight feel like a forgotten memory. "You're afraid," the figure said suddenly, breaking the silence. Their voice seemed almost amused, yet laced with something darker, more sinister. "You should be." You didn't respond immediately, too focused on keeping your footing as the path seemed to shift beneath your feet. The forest felt alive, as if every tree, every branch, every rustle of leaves was a reminder that you were intruding in a space that wasn't meant for you. The faces in the bark, those twisted, agonized expressions, began to appear more frequently, now staring out from the trees in all directions. They seemed to follow you, their hollow eyes unblinking, watching your every movement. The figure paused, and you nearly ran into them again, startled by their sudden stop. They turned to face you, their features still hidden beneath the shadow of their hood. "This is where it begins," they said, their voice low and almost reverent. "The heart of the forest." You looked around, trying to make sense of your surroundings, but all you saw was darkness, thick and oppressive. The trees had grown even taller here, their trunks twisted in impossible shapes. The fog had thickened into a mist that clung to the ground, curling around your ankles like cold fingers. The ground beneath your feet felt soft and spongy, as though it were alive, shifting with each step. Suddenly, the figure stepped forward again, their cloak trailing behind them like a ghost, and you followed, unable to shake the growing sense of urgency. The deeper you went, the more disorienting the forest became. The wind had picked up, and it no longer sounded like a gentle breeze rustling through leaves. Now it howled through the trees like the wail of a lost soul, carrying with it strange whispers, words you couldn't quite make out but that felt wrong. The air seemed thick with the weight of centuries of forgotten stories, of lost souls trapped between realms, unable to move on. "We're close," the figure said, their voice barely audible over the rising wind. "Closer than you think." You followed them without question, though the hairs on the back of your neck were standing on end. Every instinct screamed at you to stop, to turn back, but something deeper than fear, kept you moving forward. It was as if the forest was pulling you in, drawing you closer to some unknown fate. And then you saw it. In the distance, barely visible through the trees, there was a faint glow. At first, you thought it was just another flicker of the firelight from the lodge, but as you drew nearer, the glow became stronger, brighter, warmer. It was the same eerie, unnatural light you'd seen when you first entered the forest, but now it felt more potent, more alive. The figure ahead of you slowed, coming to a stop at the edge of a clearing. The glow was now unmistakable, a strange, pulsating light that emanated from the very ground itself. It was as if the earth was alive, glowing from within, breathing. And as you stepped closer, you felt it. The ground beneath your feet seemed to thrum with energy, the air vibrating around you, like the hum of a tuning fork struck too hard. In the center of the clearing stood an ancient stone structure, an archway, its surface covered in strange runes and symbols you didn't recognize. The archway was carved from black stone, its edges jagged and worn, as though it had stood here for countless centuries. The glowing light emanated from within the arch, casting long, unnatural shadows across the clearing. The figure stepped forward, crossing the threshold of the archway without hesitation. The moment they passed through, the air seemed to shift. The wind stopped howling, and for a brief moment, everything fell into an eerie silence. The trees stopped whispering, the forest seemed to hold its breath, and even the mist seemed to freeze in place, suspended in time. You stood at the edge of the clearing, your heart racing. The figure was waiting for you on the other side, their forms silhouetted by the strange light that pulsed from the archway. "Come," they beckoned, their voice gentle yet insistent. "You must step through. The heart of the forest is waiting." You felt a pull deep within your chest, drawing you toward the archway. The closer you got, the stronger it became. It was as though the forest itself was calling to you, urging you to cross into the unknown. And though every fiber of your being screamed at you to run, you couldn't resist. You stepped forward, your foot crossing the threshold of the arch. The moment you did, everything changed. The air thickened, and the ground beneath you seemed to shift. The glowing light around you intensified, casting strange, otherworldly shadows that flickered like firelight. You could feel the temperature drop dramatically, a sharp, biting cold that seeped into your bones. The forest that had been so quiet before now seemed alive, vibrating with an energy you couldn't understand. The figure before you smiled, though their face was still obscured by their hood. "You see now," they whispered, their voice like a caress, yet laced with something far darker. "The heart of the forest is not just a place. It is a power. And you, my dear traveler, are its next guest." Your body trembled as you tried to make sense of what was happening. The trees around you began to move. No, not move, shift, their trunks twisting and bending in unnatural ways. The ground seemed to ripple like waves on a dark ocean. And the faces, those faces in the bark, now seemed to shift, to scream, to reach toward you, their mouths gaping wide in eternal agony. The figure turned to face you, their eyes glowing in the dim light. "Welcome," they said softly, their voice a haunting melody. "Welcome to the true forest." The moment you stepped fully through the archway, the air seemed to pulse around you, thick with an energy you couldn't describe. It was as if the forest itself had exhaled, releasing some dark, ancient power that wrapped itself around you. The ground beneath your feet felt soft, like moss-covered stone, yet when you tried to look down, it was as if the earth was breathing, the soil shifting beneath you, sending ripples of unseen movement through the air. The figure was still ahead of you, standing in the center of the clearing. They turned slightly, their face hidden beneath their hood, but you could feel their eyes on you, gleaming with a knowledge that sent a chill racing up your spine. They didn't speak immediately, but the silence between you felt more like an invitation. one you weren't sure you wanted to accept. Look around, the figure finally spoke, their voice soft but commanding. You are in the heart of the forest now. This is the place where the boundary between worlds is thinnest. What you see is not just a forest, it is a realm unto itself. You swallowed hard, your throat dry. What do you mean? What is this place? The figure took a slow step forward, their cloak trailing behind them like a wisp of smoke. This is where the lost ones come. The ones who wander too far, the ones who are drawn into the woods by something they can't understand. They paused, their eyes now gleaming brighter in the dim light. And once they arrive, they never leave. Not in the way they came. The words settled over you like a weight, heavy and suffocating. A part of you wanted to run, to turn back and escape, but there was no turning back now, was there? The path had been set, and you could feel the forest drawing you deeper into its embrace. The very trees around you seemed to close in, their trunks stretching higher, their roots twisting beneath the earth like the fingers of a giant, searching for something. Why did you bring me here? You managed to ask, your voice shaking more than you intended. The figure's smile was slow, almost predatory, their lips curling beneath the shadow of their hood. You came willingly, they said softly. The forest does not choose its guests. It simply invites. But you were always meant to come. Meant to come? The question felt absurd, but you asked it anyway, desperate to understand. What? What do you want from me? The figure took another step forward, their presence now overwhelming, filling the space between you like a shadow that stretched longer and longer with each passing moment. What do we want from you? Oh, it's not about what we want. Their voice grew deeper, more insistent. It's about what you want. What you need. They stepped aside, and for the first time since you'd entered the forest, you looked around you properly. The trees were no longer just trees. They were sentinels, towering above you like ancient beings, their bark thick and knotted, scarred with the marks of time. The branches overhead twisted and knotted, their fingers reaching out as if trying to touch the very stars above, but the stars themselves were hidden, shrouded in a layer of oppressive clouds. The sky above was dark, an unnatural shade of black that seemed to swallow all light, leaving only a faint, sickly glow to illuminate the landscape. The ground, too, had changed. The mist had become thicker, swirling around your feet in tendrils that seemed to move with a mind of their own. It wasn't just fog now, it was alive. And from the depths of the mist, you could hear it. Faint whispers as though hundreds, thousands of voices were speaking at once. Some were distant, indistinct, while others were close, urgent, their words slipping in and out of your mind. They are all here, the figure continued, gesturing around them as though speaking to the forest itself. The ones who came before you. The ones who failed. The ones who found the truth and couldn't escape. You felt your pulse quicken, the weight of their words sinking deep into your bones. Every instinct told you to turn and run, but your legs refused to move. The whispers grew louder now, their voices coiling around your thoughts, curling into your mind like smoke. They spoke in a language you didn't understand, but somehow you knew the meaning. It was a language of despair, of loss, of endless wandering. Do you hear them? The figure's voice broke through the growing cacophony, sharp and commanding. They are the forest's past, its present, and its future. They will never leave. Neither will you. You tried to shake the image of the faces from your mind, those twisted, tortured expressions carved into the trees, but they were everywhere now, and you could feel them watching you. The wind whispered through the branches, but it was no longer just wind. It was a voice too. A low, guttural voice, like the growl of some massive beast hidden deep within the woods. This place, it's a prison, you whispered, the realization settling over you like a cold fog. A prison for the souls of the lost. The figure nodded slowly, a cruel smile still on their lips. A prison? Yes, in a way. But it's also a gateway. A place where the veil between worlds is thin, and all things that are forgotten, memories, desires, regrets, can be drawn into the forest. The forest consumes them, reshapes them, makes them part of the whole. You stepped back, suddenly feeling smaller, insignificant, as though the forest itself had grown in stature, towering over you like a vast, dark god. And you, the figure continued, are the latest to join its ranks. You think you are here by chance, but you are not. You are here because you were always meant to be. The forest calls to those who are lost, who seek answers they cannot understand. And you, my dear, are no different. The trees around you began to shift once again, the branches creaking as they bent low, their bark groaning under the strain. The ground trembled beneath your feet, as though the earth itself were shifting to some unseen rhythm. And the whispers, they grew louder now, urgent, desperate. You closed your eyes for a moment, trying to block out the voices, the faces, the suffocating feeling of the forest closing in. When you opened them again, the figure was gone. Just like that. Vanished as if they were part of the mist. The only thing that remained was the pulsating light from the archway, flickering now, fading in and out, casting strange, jagged shadows across the ground. The voices grew louder, louder still, until you could hear nothing else. They were all around you now, whispering your name, calling you, pulling you deeper into the forest's heart. And then you understood. There was no way out. Not unless the forest allowed it. You were lost. The pulsating light from the archway flickered again, casting strange shadows that twisted across the darkened forest floor. The air felt thick, pressing against your skin like a heavy cloak, and the whispers, those countless voices, were all around you now, louder and more insistent, as if the forest itself were speaking to you, pleading with you to understand. You tried to shake the dizziness that was starting to cloud your thoughts. Every breath you took seemed heavier than the last, the air thick with the scent of damp leaves, old wood, and something else, something metallic like blood. Your eyes darted to the trees around you, their twisted trunks and gnarled roots clawing at the earth, their faces staring out at you, their mouths open in silent screams. The forest was alive in a way that went beyond anything you had ever imagined. It was as though it knew you, as though it had been waiting for you all along. The whispers were becoming overwhelming now, and you pressed your hands to your ears in a futile attempt to block them out. They weren't just words. They were memories, fragments of voices, twisted and distorted, telling stories of people long gone, of travelers who had come to the forest and never returned. Some were crying for help. Others begged for mercy. A few seemed resigned to their fate, repeating the same haunting words over and over again, as if trapped in an endless loop. They'll never leave. It calls to you. Lost, forever lost. You took a step back, your breath quickening as the darkness pressed closer. The forest was shifting again, the trees bending and groaning as if they were alive and watching, waiting for you to make your move. The mist curled around your ankles, moving like a living thing, and the ground beneath you seemed to move, as if something was shifting beneath the surface, something massive and ancient that had been waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. A flicker of movement caught your eye, and you turned quickly. Through the mist you saw something, someone, standing in the distance. A figure, half-formed and barely visible, their body shimmering like a mirage. They were moving, stumbling toward you, their hands outstretched, as if reaching for something. Or perhaps someone. Help me, please. The voice was faint, weak, but unmistakably human. You hesitated, your heart pounding in your chest. The figure was moving closer now, their features becoming clearer with each step, though they were still shrouded in the fog. They were raw. Their movements were jerky, unnatural, as if they weren't entirely in control of their body, as though they were being pulled along by some invisible force. Please, the voice whispered again, growing louder now, desperate. Help me. I'm lost. Please. Your feet felt frozen to the ground. You knew you should run, that this was dangerous, that this was the forest's trick, its trap, but you couldn't bring yourself to move. The figure was so close now you could almost see their face, twisted, pale, eyes wide with fear. And then, as though the mist had parted just for a moment, you saw them fully. It was a man, young, perhaps in his 20s, his clothes tattered and covered in dirt, his face gaunt and hollow, eyes wide with terror. But it wasn't the man's appearance that struck you, it was the look in his eyes. There was no recognition there. No hope. Just empty despair. And then you saw it. A dark, shadowy figure clung to his back, like a parasite, its form blurred and shifting, its features impossible to make out. It was almost as if it was attached to him, feeding off his fear, growing stronger with every moment. The man staggered toward you, reaching out with trembling hands. Help me, please, don't let it take me too. Before you could react, the figure lunged forward, its hands, if they could be called hands, grabbing the man by the throat. The man let out a terrible scream, his body going rigid as the shadowy figure pressed its weight down upon him. You could hear the sickening sound of bones breaking, of air being crushed from his lungs, as the dark figure seemed to consume him. And then, with a sudden, deafening silence, the figure vanished. The man's body crumpled to the ground in a heap, his lifeless form slumping in the mist, his face twisted in a final expression of horror. His body was still warm, but there was no pulse, no breath. A sickening chill gripped your heart as you stared at the body, unable to look away. The whispers, once distant, now seemed to be coming from all around you. They were laughing, mocking your fear, your helplessness. The forest was alive with their laughter, and you realized with a terrible sense of finality that it was not just the trees, the mist, or the wind that had a voice. It was the forest itself, alive, aware, feeding on the souls of those who wandered too deep. And the worst part? You could feel it now. The pull. The same pull that had drawn you into the forest was now inside you, burrowing deep within your chest, spreading through your veins, urging you forward, deeper into the heart of the forest. You were becoming like them. The lost ones. The ones who came, searching for something they couldn't name, only to vanish into the woods, becoming a part of the forest's endless cycle. The laughter grew louder, more intense, as though the forest itself was celebrating your arrival, welcoming you to your new fate. You turned quickly, your mind racing as you stumbled backward, away from the body, away from the shadowy figure that had consumed him. You needed to move. You needed to escape. But the forest wouldn't let you. With every step you took, the trees seemed to close in, the mist growing thicker. The path that had once seemed clear now twisted and turned, leading you in circles, pulling you deeper into the forest's heart. Every direction seemed to lead you back to where you started, and the more you struggled, the more hopeless it became. And then, just as you thought you might lose your mind entirely, a voice broke through the overwhelming cacophony of whispers. You're not alone. You froze, heart hammering in your chest. The voice was close, so close it was as if it was coming from inside your head. It was not the figure. It was not the forest. It was someone else. Someone who had been lost just like you. Help me, the voice said, a faint echo of desperation. Find me and I'll show you the way out. The voice echoed in your mind, faint but unmistakable. It wasn't the eerie, unsettling chorus of the forest's whispers. This voice was different. It was clear, desperate, a lifeline thrown into the sea of darkness surrounding you. You could feel it tugging at your very soul, urging you to listen, to find the source of it. Find me, it repeated, a tremor of fear threading through the words. I can help you, but you must come closer. Your heart raced, the weight of the forest pressing down on you, but still, the voice called. The figure from before, the shadowy presence that had consumed the man, had left an imprint on your mind. But this was something different, something more human, something more real. You paused, torn between the crushing fear that clung to you like the thick fog and the strange, almost magnetic pull of the voice. It wasn't the forest trying to trap you, but someone, somewhere, calling for help. Someone who had been lost here just like you. Who are you? You asked, your voice trembling. You barely recognized it. It was small, fragile, as if the very act of speaking made the forest's presence seem more oppressive. But the voice responded, its tone faint yet full of urgency. Don't listen to them, it said, as though the very words themselves were struggling to break free from the crushing pressure of the forest. The forest wants you. The archway is a trap. It takes your soul and leaves you hollow. The air around you thickened with a low hum, a vibration that seemed to come from the very earth beneath your feet. The voice's words, filled with panic and fear, resonated deep within you, stirring something primal in the back of your mind. The forest wants you. You shook your head, trying to clear it, but the mist wrapped around you like an inescapable veil. The laughter from the lost souls grew louder, surrounding you on all sides, echoing in your ears, turning your thoughts into a blur. But then, just as the voices seemed to overwhelm you, the voice broke through again, sharper, more desperate. Please, it pleaded. You must hurry. They're watching you. The trees, the spirits, they're waiting for you to make a mistake. The tone of the voice shifted, now filled with a quiet desperation. You cannot trust the forest. It will bend you, twist you. It changes people. The moment you stop, the moment you give in to its power, you lose yourself. Your breath quickened. Could you trust this voice? Could you believe it? The shadows in the trees flickered, the shapes shifting in the corners of your vision like restless specters. The mist swirled around you in a dance, thickening, darkening. But the voice was insistent. Turn back. You stepped forward, the pull of the voice stronger now, guiding you through the fog towards whatever lay hidden in the depths of the forest. The trees around you seemed to grow taller as you moved deeper into the mist, their branches bending like spindly arms reaching for the sky. The twisted faces in the bark had become more pronounced now, their eyes watching you with an intensity that was almost suffocating. But there was something else, something new, something darker. Eyes that glowed faintly through the trees, their light cold and unnatural. But it was the voice that kept you moving forward. It had to be real. There had to be someone else out there, someone who had found a way to survive this nightmare. Closer, it urged. Come closer before they... Suddenly, the voice was cut off, and a loud crack echoed through the air, splitting the silence like thunder. You froze, your body stiff with fear, and the whispering grew louder, more frantic, swirling around you like a storm. The trees groaned, their trunks twisting unnaturally as if trying to reach for you. A massive shadow moved through the fog, its presence enormous and terrifying. You couldn't see it clearly, but you could feel it, this massive, hulking thing, its steps reverberating through the ground, its eyes burning into you with a malevolent force. The voice broke through the chaos, but now it was distorted, cracked, as if it were struggling against some unseen force. Don't stop moving. Run. Panic surged through your veins, and your legs moved before your mind could catch up. You ran. The path was no longer clear. It had twisted and shifted, becoming a labyrinth of trees and thorns. You could hear it now, the sound of something following you, moving through the forest with unnatural speed, its footsteps heavy and deliberate. Behind you, the trees seemed to shift and bend, opening up into a massive clearing. The mist cleared just enough for you to see a shape in the distance. A figure, tall and cloaked, standing in the center of the clearing. The figure's presence was commanding, almost tangible, as if it were part of the forest itself. The figure raised one long, skeletal hand, its fingers elongated, its nails sharp like claws. It didn't speak, but you could hear its presence in your mind, a voice deeper than anything you had ever heard. "Welcome, lost soul," it said, its voice like the rumbling of thunder, low and all-encompassing. "You have come far, but you will never leave." You froze again, the weight of its words crashing over you like a wave. The air grew colder, the forest seemed to close in, and the mist thickened, swirling around your legs like tendrils. The figure in the clearing was moving toward you, its movements slow but inexorable. "Turn back," the voice whispered in your mind. "You must leave now, before it's too late. They're not human anymore." You turned in the direction the voice had guided you, but the forest around you had changed. The trees no longer formed a path. The ground beneath your feet was now soft and slick, like wet clay, as if the forest itself had risen up to prevent your escape. The figure in the clearing continued to move toward you, its presence looming ever closer. The shadows began to twist, stretching impossibly long as though they were reaching for you. The once beautiful, ancient trees were now distorted, their limbs like jagged, skeletal fingers. And in the distance you could see, feel, the oppressive weight of the forest. It wasn't just a place. It was a being, a consciousness that had existed for eons, feeding on the lost, the forgotten, those who wandered too far. You had walked into its domain. You were its prey. And then you realized something far more terrifying. The forest wasn't just trapping you, it was feeding on you. It was feeding on your fear. The figure in the clearing had reached the edge of the fog, and now you could see it more clearly. It was no longer just a shadow or a fleeting image. It was real, and it was terrifying. The figure was tall, towering over you, its body draped in tattered dark robes that seemed to shimmer with the faintest hints of movement, as though they were alive. Its face was hidden beneath a hood, but two glowing eyes, pale and cold, like the light of the moon through a storm, burned through the darkness, fixing you in place. It moved without sound, its feet barely touching the ground. With each step, the forest seemed to breathe, the trees groaning as if they were bending to its will. The wind had stopped, and in the silence, the world seemed to hold its breath. You could feel the weight of the forest pressing down on you. The trees around you whispered in a language you couldn't understand, their branches creaking like bones. The mist, thick and cold, curled around your ankles, pulling at you like invisible hands. And then, from somewhere deeper in the woods, came the unmistakable sound of something large moving, something hunting. But your attention was held by the figure. Its presence was overwhelming, and even though it didn't speak, its intentions were clear. It was not here to help you. It was here to consume you. The voice, the one that had been guiding you, spoke again, its tone now panicked, almost pleading. "No, don't listen to it. It feeds on you, on your fear. You cannot stay here." Your heart raced, your breath shallow. The figure in the clearing continued its slow, deliberate approach, and as it did, you could feel something stirring within the forest, something ancient and malevolent. It was as if the very ground was shifting, its roots reaching deeper into the earth, pulling at the fabric of the world itself. "Do you understand now?" The figure's voice rang out in your mind, its tone cold and resonant. The forest does not simply trap the lost. It feasts on them. It consumes their souls, their memories, until there is nothing left but the hollow shell of a person. It has always been this way. Your legs felt like lead, and yet you couldn't turn away. The figure reached out a skeletal hand, its fingers elongated and covered in shadows, as though they were made of the very darkness around you. "Come," it said, its voice not just a sound but a command that seemed to echo through your entire being. "You belong to the forest now. It's only a matter of time." For a moment, your mind spun with confusion. You tried to remember how you had gotten here, what had brought you to this point. Was it the forest that had drawn you in? Or had you come willingly, searching for something you couldn't name? The whispers grew louder now, filling your mind with fragments of thoughts that weren't your own. Lost travelers, faces distorted by agony, souls that had wandered too far and were now part of the forest's endless feast. You were always meant to come here, the figure continued. The forest has seen the empty places inside you, the hunger you've carried with you your entire life. And now it has called you home. Home. The word felt wrong, twisted. It felt like a prison. Suddenly the ground beneath you shuddered. The roots of the trees seemed to pulse with life, reaching up through the soil like veins in the body of some great creature. The earth itself groaned as though the forest was awakening, its hunger stirring in the deepest corners of its heart. The figure stepped forward again, closer now, its face still hidden in shadow. You feel it, don't you? It asked, its voice low and seductive. The hunger, the emptiness. The forest offers freedom, but it requires a price. It requires your soul. You tried to step back, but the mist wrapped around your legs, pulling you closer to the figure. Panic surged through your chest, but no matter how hard you tried, you couldn't escape. The forest wasn't just alive, it was aware. It was a force that had existed far longer than you could comprehend, older than time itself, and it knew you better than you knew yourself. You cannot leave, the figure said, as though it were stating a simple fact. You've already been consumed. Your fear, your uncertainty, your loneliness, these are the things the forest feeds on. And now they are you. You are part of the forest. The ground trembled again, and this time you could see it, the thing moving beneath the earth. The trees groaned in unison, and something vast stirred in the distance. It was like a massive pulse, a heartbeat of something far greater than anything human. You opened your mouth to scream, to run, but no sound came out. Your body felt heavy, as if the weight of the forest was pressing down on you, holding you in place. And then you understood. The forest was not just feeding on you, it was feeding on everyone who came here. The lost souls, the travelers who wandered too far, were not just trapped. They were broken down, consumed until only fragments remained. Memories, desires, fears, they were all part of the feast, feeding the dark, insatiable hunger of the trees. The forest didn't just want you. It needed you. It needed your very essence to survive. Do you see? The figure's voice echoed, its tone almost triumphant. You are already here. You are already one of us. The ground beneath you seemed to shift, as if opening up, and in that moment, you felt the earth swallow you whole. It wasn't just physical. It was as though your very soul was being drawn into the forest, pulled into the roots, the leaves, the dark, pulsing heart of it. You tried to scream again, but this time the sound was lost in the rush of something deeper, something colder. The forest was taking you, pulling you into its depths. And then, with a sharp, painful pull, everything stopped. The forest was silent. The mist had cleared, the fog lifting just enough to reveal the vast expanse around you. You were no longer in the clearing. No, you were standing on a path, one that seemed to stretch infinitely ahead, flanked by towering trees on either side. Their twisted faces stared out at you from the bark, their eyes wide, filled with endless hunger. The figure was gone. The presence of the forest was no longer overwhelming, it was suffocating. The stillness that surrounded you was broken only by the faint whisper of leaves in the wind. But there was something else, something moving. And you realized with a horrifying clarity that you were not alone. Not anymore. The path before you stretched endlessly, an unnerving straight line that seemed to draw deeper into the heart of the forest, a place where the trees loomed larger and more imposing. The air was thick, the oppressive silence broken only by the occasional creak of a tree bending in the unseen wind, but there was something else now, something darker. You could feel it, a presence pressing against your mind, seeping into your thoughts, warping them like a twisted reflection in a cracked mirror. The mist had finally lifted, but the sky above was not the bright, star-strewn sky you had once known. It was black, vast, and empty, a chasm of darkness that seemed to swallow all light. The stars, those small beacons of hope that once guided travelers through the night, were absent here. In their place, there was only the cold, stifling void of the forest. Your body moved on its own, your feet carrying you down the path, but your mind remained distant, disconnected from the reality around you. The further you walked, the heavier your limbs became, as though the very earth beneath you was dragging you into its depths. The trees around you seemed to whisper in unison, their voices indistinct but constant, murmuring in a language you couldn't quite understand. They seemed to mock you, to laugh at your attempts to comprehend the impossible situation you found yourself in. You were lost. Not just physically, but in a way that went beyond direction. It felt as though the very fabric of reality had torn, and you were suspended in a place between worlds. This wasn't just a forest, it was a prison, an endless labyrinth that fed on the lost, consuming them until there was nothing left but hollow echoes of what once was. As you walked, a creeping sensation crawled up your spine, something cold and insistent, urging you to look over your shoulder. You had always been taught to trust your instincts, and right now they were screaming at you. You turned. There, standing at the edge of the path, was a figure. At first, you thought it might be another person, but as your eyes adjusted to the dim light, you saw that it was wrong. Its form was human, but stretched in unnatural ways, like a ragged puppet held together by shadows. Its arms were too long, its legs too thin, and its head tilted at an odd, disturbing angle, as if it was staring at you through a broken lens. Its face was featureless, at least at first glance. There were no eyes, no mouth, just smooth, pale skin stretched taut over an empty, skull-like structure. But as you stared longer, its face seemed to shift, like a reflection in rippling water. Its mouth slowly opened, but what emerged was not a sound, but a wave, a pulse of unbearable cold that flooded your chest, squeezing the air from your lungs. The figure didn't move, yet its presence seemed to fill the entire path, like it was part of the very trees, a shadow made flesh. You could feel its hunger, a gnawing emptiness that was impossible to ignore. It was watching you, and its attention was unnerving in a way that made you feel like prey, raw and exposed. But worse than that, you felt empty. Like you were no longer a person, but just a collection of hollow fragments, barely held together by the fractured memory of who you once were. For the briefest moment, you considered turning back, fleeing down the path you had just come, but something told you it would be no use. The forest had a way of bending the world, shifting it, and you knew that wherever you went, it would find you. The figure stepped closer, its long arms dragging behind it like the limbs of a corpse, scraping along the earth. And then, in a low, rasping voice that sent a shiver down your spine, it spoke. "We are all lost here." The words were like a spell, wrapping around you, pulling at the very fabric of your thoughts. It was a language that felt both ancient and alien, something that was more felt than understood. The figure stepped closer still, its fingers now grazing the edge of your arm, and you recoiled instinctively, but you could not escape. There was nowhere to run. "You are not the first to come," it whispered. "The forest, it feeds on those who wander. The path you walk, the place where you stand, is nothing more than the hollowing." You tried to speak, but your voice faltered, caught in your throat. The fear that had been bubbling within you began to rise, a panic that threatened to consume you whole. Your thoughts scattered, like pieces of a puzzle thrown to the wind, and for a moment, you weren't sure where you ended and the forest began. "What is this place?" you managed to whisper, your voice barely audible over the pounding of your heart. The figure tilted its head further, its long, elongated neck creaking like a branch bending under pressure. Its hollow face flickered again, and for a moment you saw something else, something darker, flickering behind its smooth skin. Eyes that were not its own, or perhaps eyes that once were, gazed at you from the void. "It is not a place," it said, its voice now a soft, guttural hum. "It is a way through. Those who wander here do not find their way. They become the way. The forest claims them, takes their bodies, their souls, and when it is done, they are nothing. Just whispers in the wind, voices in the trees." It paused, its fingers brushing your arm once more, sending a shock of icy cold through your veins. The chill was unnatural, as if the very essence of the forest was being absorbed into your body. "You will become one of us," it continued. "You will become part of the hollowing. And when the forest calls again, you will not resist. You will walk its path, and it will consume you, like all who came before you." Your pulse quickened, but there was no fight left in you. The fear was too great, too all-encompassing, and the forest's pull was suffocating. Your body felt like it was being drained, emptied of something vital, something you couldn't quite name. "Who are you?" you asked, barely managing the words. The figure's face flickered once again, and then, in a voice that seemed to resonate from deep within the earth, it spoke one last time. "We are the lost ones, the ones who could not escape. The forest's hunger is eternal, and you are its next feast." And with that, the figure stepped back into the darkness, melting into the trees as though it had never been there at all. The path ahead remained unchanged, endless, stretching forward into the darkness. The whispers continued, growing louder as though the entire forest was speaking in unison, urging you forward, guiding you deeper into its twisted heart. But you knew now, you were no longer just a wanderer. You were part of the forest, a piece of its insatiable hunger. And there was no escape. The air was thick with the scent of decay, damp earth, and something sharper, something metallic. You felt it in your chest, the pressure of the forest like a hand clenched tight around your heart. The path stretched endlessly before you, no longer just a mere trail but a twisted corridor, pulling you deeper into the very marrow of the woods. You could feel its pulse, the rhythmic thrum of the forest as it breathed around you, beneath you, above you. The trees seemed to lean in, their branches like outstretched arms, grasping, waiting. The forest feeds, the voice in your head repeated. It takes, and it consumes, and you are now part of that hunger. There is no escape. The whispers grew louder. At first, they had been faint, distant voices, like a soft breeze carrying secrets between the trees. But now they had become a cacophony, rising and falling in waves, twisting around you like the roots of the ancient trees. Each word, each syllable was wrapped in layers of sorrow, despair, and an unspoken promise that you would never leave. They are all here, the whispers seemed to say, the lost, the forgotten, the broken. As you walked, the forest around you began to shift. The trees, once mere silhouettes in the distance, now seemed to close in, their trunks so thick you could no longer see beyond them. The air grew colder, the mist returning in slow, creeping tendrils, curling around your feet, licking at your ankles like the tongues of hungry beasts. The ground was soft beneath you, like mud that threatened to swallow you whole, each step a struggle, a desperate attempt to move forward. And then you saw it. At the end of the path, where the trees were thickest, there was a faint glow, a pale light that flickered like a dying flame. It beckoned to you, drawing your attention as if the forest itself were guiding you toward it. You hesitated, a part of you screaming to turn away, to run back, to escape. But your legs moved on their own, dragging you forward. The pull of the forest, the hunger that had awakened within you, was too strong. The path was no longer just a way through the trees, it was a part of you, an extension of the force that had trapped you here. The glow grew brighter as you neared, and the air grew colder still, biting at your skin, seeping into your bones. You stumbled forward, each step a painful drag, until you finally broke through the thicket of trees and entered a clearing. It was the heart of the forest. Before you stood a structure, ancient and towering, its silhouette casting long, twisted shadows across the ground. The lodge. The one that had been a distant memory, a place you had heard of in whispers, a place of refuge for the lost. But as you stood there now, in the shadow of its decaying walls, you realized that it was no refuge at all. It was a trap, a dark heart beating at the center of the forest, pulling in the souls of those who dared to venture too deep. The lodge was made of dark wood, the kind that seemed to absorb the light around it. Its roof was sagging, covered in thick layers of moss and lichen, as if it had been here for centuries, maybe even longer. The windows were dark, the glass shattered or long since gone, leaving only empty frames that seemed to stare back at you like hollow eyes. The door was ajar, creaking gently as if inviting you inside. But you knew that the forest was waiting for you. It had drawn you here, and the lodge was its final test. You have arrived, a voice whispered from the shadows of the clearing, a voice deep and hollow, echoing through the trees. You froze. The voice was unmistakable, the same voice that had guided you here. It wasn't the whispering trees, nor the hollow figure you had encountered before. This was something more, something deeper, older. The figure materialized from the mist, emerging from the darkness of the lodge's doorway like a shadow come to life. It was the same one from before, the one with the hollow face and elongated limbs, its body a twisted reflection of humanity. But now there was something different about it. Its form seemed to shimmer, to pulse, as though it were made of both shadow and light, solid and intangible. "You are close," it said, its voice cold and distant, yet somehow familiar. "Closer than you realize." Your heart pounded in your chest. "What do you want from me?" you asked, though the question felt weak in your mouth, like the words had already been spoken 1,000 times in your head, and the answer was inevitable. The figure tilted its head as if considering your question. It stepped closer, its movements slow and deliberate, like a predator closing in on its prey. "What do we want?" It repeated the words as if tasting them. "The forest has always wanted this, wanted you. You are not the first to walk this path. You are not the first to stand in this place." The figure raised one long bony hand, and as it did, the air around you shifted. The temperature dropped, the cold sinking deeper into your bones. You could feel it then, the pulse, the thrum, the heartbeat of the forest itself, resonating through the very air, vibrating in your chest, urging you forward, urging you to surrender. "This lodge," the figure continued, its voice now almost a whisper, "is the center of it all. It is the place where the lost souls gather. It is where they are claimed, where they merge with the forest. They feed the trees, they feed the hunger of the earth, and when they are consumed, they become part of this place." The ground beneath your feet shifted. You felt the earth tremble, the roots of the trees extending beneath you, reaching up to claim you. The whispering grew louder now, filling your mind with images of faces, lost faces, all those who had come before you, trapped, consumed, their bodies and souls nothing more than fuel for the forest's insatiable hunger. You will join them, the figure said, its voice growing colder, more distant, as though it were fading into the forest itself. You will become part of the hollowing. And in that moment you understood. The forest wasn't just a place. It was a living thing, a vast, ancient entity that had been feeding on the lost for millennia. And now it wanted you. It wanted your soul, your fear, your very essence. You were nothing more than a meal. Another fragment to be consumed by the unrelenting hunger of the forest. You wanted to scream, to fight, to run. But you couldn't move. Your legs felt like stone, your body frozen in place, trapped in the heart of the forest, where the darkness seeped into your very soul. The figure stepped back, disappearing into the mist, leaving you alone in the clearing. The path before you seemed to stretch on forever, but there was no turning back. No escape. The lodge stood before you, its door beckoning, waiting, and you knew then that there was no hope of leaving. The door to the lodge stood open, as if inviting you into its dark heart, but there was no real choice anymore. The path had closed off behind you. The figure had spoken of the hollowing, a process you didn't fully understand, but you could feel its weight pressing on you, pulling you toward the looming structure. Your legs moved against your will, your feet dragging through the thickening mist, the sensation of being watched never leaving you. The whispering had not stopped, and now the voices seemed to merge, to become a single overwhelming presence, as though the entire forest was holding its breath, waiting for you to make your final step. The door creaked as you passed beneath the archway, the darkness inside swallowing you whole. The air here was thick and oppressive, stale with the scent of rot and mildew, but there was something else beneath it, a strange, acrid scent that burned your nostrils, like something that had been dead for far too long. The faintest glow illuminated the interior, casting long, eerie shadows against the cracked, decaying walls. The floorboards groaned beneath your weight, each step a low, mournful creak that echoed in the silence, as if the building itself was alive, sensing your arrival. Inside, the lodge was a nightmare of twisted shapes and broken remnants. Cobwebs hung from every corner, and piles of dust, old furniture, and crumbling, faded tapestries cluttered the space, as if time itself had forgotten this place. But there was something more, something about the air inside the lodge that felt alive. It wasn't just a house. It was a living thing, breathing, waiting. The walls, cracked and decaying, seemed to pulse with a low vibration, like the beat of a heart far too old. The air felt thick, as though it were saturated with the weight of forgotten lives, and in the corner of your vision, you saw things, shadows, flickering and vanishing too quickly to be real. Shapes that moved just out of sight, twisting in and out of the dark. You turned, expecting to see the figure again, but there was nothing. Just the suffocating silence and the oppressive darkness pressing in on all sides. Then you heard it. The sound that had once been distant, a murmur in the background of your mind, now grew clearer. The sound of slow, dragging footsteps, echoing from somewhere deep within the lodge. At first, it was so faint you weren't sure if you had imagined it, but then it grew louder, closer. The scraping of nails against wood, the sound of something dragging across the floor, inching toward you. Something was in the lodge with you. Your breath caught in your throat as you strained your eyes, trying to see through the darkness, trying to make sense of what was real and what was an illusion. But the shadows seemed to shift in strange, unnatural patterns, as though the very air inside the lodge was warping, bending reality itself. And then, just as suddenly, the footsteps stopped. You didn't dare move, standing frozen in the darkness, heart pounding in your chest. The whispering had returned, louder now, a chorus of voices swirling around you, so close you could almost feel the breath on the back of your neck. "You are not alone here," a voice whispered, low and rasping, like the sound of dry leaves being crumpled. You spun around, but again there was nothing. A shadow moved in the corner of your eye, too quick to catch, but unmistakable. Your body tensed, every muscle frozen with dread, and then you saw it. A figure, hunched and twisted, crouched in the shadows at the far end of the room. It was barely human. Its limbs were too long, too thin, its back bent at an impossible angle. Its face, if it could be called that, was a mass of tangled flesh, eyes wide and unblinking, staring into you with an intensity that made your skin crawl. The mouth was twisted, jagged, half-formed, and as it opened, you could hear the scraping sound again, the sound of bone grinding against bone. The figure made no sound, no movement. It simply stared, its gaze unnervingly still. What is it waiting for? You thought, but before you could answer, the creature's head tilted at a sharp angle, and in that moment you realized it wasn't waiting for anything. It was already part of the forest. The realization hit you like a punch to the gut. This was it. The lodge was a vessel, a collection point for those who had been consumed, their essence and their bodies taken by the hunger of the forest. The twisted creatures, the figures that moved in the shadows, they were once human. They were the lost ones, the souls that had been devoured by the forest, their memories hollowed out, their bodies reshaped into something new, something hungry. And you were going to become one of them. Suddenly, the ground beneath your feet shifted, a tremor running through the lodge like an earthquake, but the walls remained standing, unmoving, as if they were part of the forest itself. The shadowed figure in the corner remained still, unmoving, its eyes never leaving you. And then, in the stillness, a new sound emerged, a low, guttural growl that seemed to come from deep within the lodge, from the very walls themselves. The air turned icy. A wind stirred, though there was no open window. The once dusty furniture began to shift, creaking and groaning as though it were being moved by an unseen hand. You felt it then, the ground, the very foundation of the lodge, shifting beneath your feet as though something large, something alive, was waking beneath the floorboards. The hollowing. You could feel it now. The hunger, the gnawing emptiness that was crawling under your skin, twisting your insides, pulling at your very soul. The figure in the corner seemed to stretch toward you, its limbs elongating, its mouth opening wider, revealing rows of jagged, serrated teeth, glistening with something wet and dark. Without thinking, your legs moved, forcing you to stumble backward, your heart racing as your breath quickened. But no matter how far you tried to move, the walls seemed to close in on you. The shadows stretched farther, the whispers growing louder, a chorus of voices begging you to join them, to become part of the forest, part of the endless hunger. And then you heard it. The voice, clearer now, no longer a whisper but a full, resonant sound, like a chorus of voices singing your name. You belong to us now. The words were not spoken, but felt. They reverberated in your bones, deep inside your chest, and you could feel them. The forest tugging at you, pulling at your insides, as if it were trying to draw out the very essence of who you were, leaving you empty, hollow, like all the others. You tried to scream, but no sound came out. The shadowy figure in the corner was moving now, gliding toward you with unnatural grace, its elongated limbs trailing behind it like a nightmare come to life. And you knew in that moment that the forest was no longer just a place. It was a living entity, a force that had consumed all who had come before, and now it was your turn. The hollowing had begun. The darkness around you thickened, and the weight of the forest's hunger pressed in on all sides. The lodge, which had once seemed like a refuge, had become a tomb, a place where the lost were drawn to die, only to be reborn as part of the forest's insatiable thirst for souls. The shadows stretched out like tendrils, wrapping around you, pulling you deeper into the clutches of the unseen. The figure in the corner, its long limbs dragging behind it, seemed to pulse with life, with hunger. Its eyes, those hollow, unblinking eyes, were fixed on you, unyielding, and you could feel them burrowing into your very soul, tearing away at the fragile remnants of your identity. It was like standing at the edge of a chasm, one so deep that you couldn't see the bottom, only the swirling abyss below. But it wasn't just the figure. The air had changed, become heavier, charged with an unnatural energy. The walls of the lodge, once silent and decaying, now seemed to breathe, the wood creaking and groaning as though it were alive. Every corner, every crack in the floorboards whispered with 1,000 voices, voices that were no longer human but echoes. The remnants of those who had come before you, lost and hollow, their essence drained by the forest's hunger, now trapped in the endless cycle of decay. You cannot escape, the figure rasped, its voice a low, drawn-out whisper that seemed to curl around you like smoke. The hollowing is inevitable. You are already part of it. Its words were sharp, cruel, but they weren't just threats. They were truths. The hunger in the forest was not just a metaphor. It was real. It was something that had existed for as long as the trees had grown, something that had consumed everything in its path. And now it wanted you. The mist outside had started to creep back inside, curling in through the broken windows and seeping under the door. It spread slowly like a living thing, wrapping around your feet, your legs, and creeping up your spine. You could feel it now, the coldness seeping into your bones, the way the lodge itself seemed to feed on you, draining the life from you with each passing second. It was as though the very foundation of this place was an extension of the forest's hunger, and you were nothing more than its next meal. You backed away, desperate to escape, but as you did, the walls of the lodge seemed to shift. The floorboards groaned beneath you, and the once spacious room now seemed to close in. It was as though the lodge was bending, warping, becoming something else. The shadows around you grew darker, deeper, as though they were swallowing the light whole. And in the corner you could hear it, the sound of something moving, dragging itself along the ground. The scraping sound was deafening now, like 1,000 nails dragging across the floor. From the darkness, something emerged, a shape, more monstrous than any figure you'd seen before. It was long and thin, its limbs elongated and impossibly twisted, its body a mass of shifting shadows. Its face was a distorted, half-formed thing, eyes bulging and hollow, mouth open wide in a grotesque, silent scream. And then, in an instant, the shadow lunged, its limbs stretching toward you with inhuman speed, its jagged mouth snapping open as it reached for you. The air turned cold, freezing, as if the very essence of the lodge had turned against you, and you knew that this was it. There would be no escape. You had walked too far into the forest, gone too deep into its hungry heart, and now it was taking you. But as its shadowy fingers brushed against your skin, the world around you fractured. A jolt ran through you, not physical but something deeper, like the very fabric of reality was tearing. You felt your body pull apart, as though your very existence was being pulled into different pieces, each fragment being drawn into the darkness, into the waiting maw of the forest. In that moment, everything went still. The shadows, the twisted creature, the lodge, everything froze in place, suspended in a horrible moment of quiet. You could feel your heartbeat, slow and steady, pounding in your chest, but it felt distant, as though it were coming from someone else. Your thoughts were heavy, like they were sinking in a thick, viscous liquid. Your limbs felt light, disconnected, as though they no longer belonged to you. And then you heard it, a voice. It wasn't the figure's voice, nor was it the chorus of whispers. This voice was different, older, more powerful. It was deep and resonant, like the voice of the earth itself. "You have come far," the voice said, and the sound of it seemed to vibrate through your very bones. "Too far to turn back now. You are already part of the forest. You always have been." The voice was calm, almost gentle, as if it were speaking to a child. But the words carried an undeniable weight. They rang in your mind, the truth of them sinking into your very core. The hollowing is not an end. It is a transformation. A beginning. The words reverberated in the air, and as they did, the shadows around you began to shift. The lodge faded, its walls warping and bending like smoke in the wind. The trees outside, the ancient, towering giants, seemed to stretch and twist, their limbs reaching toward the sky like dark, skeletal arms. Transformation. You could feel it now, the change beginning deep inside you, like the roots of the forest were wrapping around your heart, twisting through your veins, pulling at your very soul. The hunger that had once seemed so foreign, so terrifying, now felt like a part of you. It was inside you. You were it. The forest's hunger had become your own. The voice spoke again, this time louder, more insistent. "The forest feeds, but it also grows. It grows through you. It becomes you." The world around you flickered. The lodge, the shadows, the figure, it all faded into the distance, replaced by a vision that was too vast, too overwhelming to comprehend. You saw it. The forest stretching as far as the eye could see, an endless, boundless wilderness. But it was more than just trees. It was alive, a living, breathing entity, pulsing with power, with hunger, with life. And you were part of it now. You were no longer just a wanderer. You were one of its roots, one of its branches. The transformation had begun. The hollowing had taken you, body and soul. And as you stood at the heart of the forest, lost within the infinite stretch of trees and shadows, you understood. You would never leave. Not now. Not ever. You were the forest now. The transformation was not swift. It was not sudden. It was a slow, creeping change, a gradual sinking into something new, something alien. At first, you didn't even notice it. Your limbs were still heavy, your breath shallow, but there was a subtle shift within you, a stirring deep inside your chest, where your heart once beat with the pulse of life. Now, the beat had grown quieter, slower, and something else was replacing it, something darker. It began with your hands. You could feel them, the skin stretched tight over bone, the fingers growing colder, stiffer. They no longer felt human, no longer felt like you. The fingers twitched, unnaturally long, and as you looked at them, you saw the shadows creeping along your skin, dark tendrils that seemed to rise from within you, wrapping around your wrists, your forearms. They were not just shadows, they were the forest. The pulse, the hunger, it was spreading through you. Your breath caught in your throat and you reached out to touch your face, but even before your hands reached it, you could feel the changes there too. The skin on your face had grown taut, stretched, and as your fingers brushed across your cheeks, you felt the faintest trace of bark, of something rough and ancient. The contours of your face were changing too subtly, imperceptibly, your features smoothing out, becoming less you and more like the faces you had seen in the trees, the twisted figures that had once been human. The very essence of you was being replaced, piece by piece, until nothing of who you had been remained. You staggered backward, but the floor beneath you felt strange, alive. It wasn't wood anymore. It was the earth. You could feel the pulse of it underfoot, the roots of the forest deep below you, reaching, grasping, pulling. You were part of the forest now. Its life, its hunger, its power were coursing through you, sinking deep into your soul. No, you whispered, though the word felt foreign in your mouth. It was a word that no longer fit with the reality you now faced. It was a human word, a desperate plea that seemed to fade into the shadows. But it was too late. The lodge around you was no longer the place it once was. The walls were no longer rotting wood but living bark, thick and knotted, stretching upward like the trunk of a colossal tree. The ceiling opened up into the sky, but it was not the sky you had known. It was a swirling mass of shadows and whispers, like the very air was thick with the voices of the lost. The mist had settled in again, creeping through the cracks, curling around your feet like the coils of some ancient serpent. You felt yourself drawn deeper, urged forward by an unseen force. Your body, no longer your own, moved on its own accord, your legs carrying you toward the center of the room, the center of the forest that had now consumed you. The lodge had become the heart of the forest, and you were its new beating pulse. In the center of the room was a tree, a twisted, gnarled thing, its bark dark and slick with something that glistened like oil. Its roots spread out like the limbs of a spider, winding and twisting into the earth, and above, its branches reached into the fog, stretching as if they were trying to grasp the sky itself. But it wasn't just any tree. As you drew closer, you saw the faces, carved into the bark, their eyes wide with terror, their mouths agape in silent screams. They were not carved. They were part of the tree. The faces were alive, their eyes blinking, their mouths twitching, trying to speak, but no sound emerged. You gasped in horror as the truth hit you all at once. The forest, the lodge, the hollowing, it wasn't just about feeding. It was about preserving, capturing. The lost souls, the ones that the forest consumed, didn't just disappear. They were preserved, their memories, their essences, their very beings kept alive within the bark of the trees, embedded in the roots of the earth. The hollowing was not just a transformation. It was a rebirth. The tree at the center of the room pulsed, its roots shaking the ground beneath your feet, sending tremors through your entire body. You could feel the energy emanating from it, a force of pure, ancient life that seemed to resonate with your very core. And then you understood. You were not alone in the transformation. The voices, the faces, they were all around you now. Not just in the tree, but in the walls, in the air, in the very ground beneath your feet. They were the lost. The ones who had been consumed before you, their souls trapped within the forest's endless hunger, their existence forever bound to the woods. And now they were calling to you. Their whispers were louder than ever before, their voices becoming a chorus of desperate, pleading sounds. Join us, they begged. Become one with us. You looked down at your hands, now more like bark than flesh. The skin had thickened, become rough and textured, the veins running through your arms now resembling the veins of leaves and branches. You were changing. You were becoming part of the very thing that had consumed you. Your breath came faster now, your chest tightening as the last remnants of your human self began to slip away. The hunger inside you, no longer just a force outside but a living thing within, began to stir, to claw at you, pulling you closer to the tree, closer to the faces that were watching, waiting for you to join them. You are becoming one of us, a voice whispered directly into your ear, so close you could feel the breath on your skin. Was the figure, the one you had seen before. It was standing beside you now, its body merging with the shadows, its long skeletal fingers brushing against your shoulder. This is the gift of the forest, the gift of the hollowing. A new life, a new purpose, a new beginning. The figure's eyes, hollow and deep, locked onto yours, and in that moment you could feel it, the connection. You were no longer a separate entity. You were part of the forest. You were one with it, your soul bound to the earth, the trees, the roots. You could feel it, the hunger, the need to feed, to grow, to spread. It was inside you like a fire that burned without end. The whispers around you intensified, and you could see them. The faces in the tree, their eyes now pleading with you, their mouths silently begging you to join them. They were not just souls. They were pieces of something greater, a greater hunger. They were all part of the forest, and now so were you. The tree before you shook again, and you knew what had to be done. The hollowing had taken you, and now it was time to take others. You could feel it, the need to feed, to grow. The cycle would continue. And as you stepped toward the tree, toward the beating heart of the forest, you realized that you would never escape. Not anymore. The forest was you, and you were the forest. The tree before you beckoned with a silent, undulating pulse, its roots twisting deeper into the earth like living veins. Each throb seemed to reverberate through your body, syncing with the unnatural rhythm of your new existence. You stood at the precipice of something far older, far darker than anything you could have imagined. The transformation was complete. There was no more you, no more the person who had once wandered these woods in search of shelter. Now you were the forest, and the forest was you. The whispers that had once felt distant and fragmented now filled your mind, overlapping each other in a maddening chorus. The voices of the lost, the hollowed, the faces trapped in the bark, their silent screams echoing through the very air around you. Each soul, each fragment of existence was now part of you, their memories, their pain, their hunger, all entwined with your own. You could feel them, feel the lost ones, lingering just beneath your surface. Their memories were like faded whispers, their desires like faint tugging at the back of your mind, each one urging you to grow, to feed, to consume. The hunger was insatiable, endless, a deep, gnawing emptiness that could never be filled. It was a hunger that wasn't just physical. It was spiritual, an urge to devour not just flesh, but the very souls that dared enter this cursed place. And in return, the forest itself would offer its gift: power, eternity, and an existence far beyond mortal comprehension. You stepped forward, your limbs moving in strange, unsettling motions, as if your body were no longer fully under your control. Each movement was an extension of the forest's will, each breath a testament to your new existence as both prey and predator. The ground beneath you was no longer solid earth, it had become a part of you. You could feel the roots of the trees stretching beneath your feet, reaching, grasping, pulling you into the soil. The air thickened, and the very atmosphere felt charged, alive with the pulse of the forest, with the pulse of life and death. The lodge, now more a hollow shell of its former self, seemed to bend and breathe around you, its walls shifting like the skin of some monstrous creature, the wood groaning under its own weight. The structure itself seemed to be becoming part of the forest, its very foundation sinking deeper into the earth. It was as if the lodge had been a cocoon, and you were the final metamorphosis. The faces in the bark twisted and writhed in agony, their eyes following you, pleading for release. But you knew now, there would be no release. They were trapped in an endless cycle, their souls feeding the hunger, forever bound to the forest, forever feeding its eternal thirst. And soon you would join them. You would become a part of the forest, a living, breathing extension of its ancient, unyielding will. As you approached the tree at the center of the room, you saw something new. A new face had appeared in the bark. It was a face you recognized. Your own. Your heart stopped. Or at least it felt like it did. The face in the tree was unmistakable. It was you, or rather, the you that had once been. The eyes were wide, staring out from the wood, the mouth twisted in a silent scream. But it wasn't just your face. It was distorted, like a reflection in a broken mirror. Your features were stretched and warped, the expression on your face a mixture of fear, desperation, and a kind of emptiness that mirrored the faces of those who had come before you. And then, as if in response to your realization, the tree's branches began to shift. They moved like living things, curling and twisting through the air, reaching for you, beckoning you closer. The bark around the face began to shift and crack, as though the tree was awakening, becoming more alive, more aware of your presence. You stood frozen, watching as the tree seemed to pulse with energy, the dark sap oozing from its bark, glistening like blood under the dim light. You could feel it then, the pull, the need to join, to merge with the tree, to become part of it, to feed. It wasn't just a desire anymore, it was a command. The forest was calling to you, urging you to feed, to fill the emptiness that had opened inside you. You reached out, your hand trembling, not in fear, but in anticipation. The tree's branches reached for you in return, and as your fingers brushed against the smooth, damp bark, a flood of memories hit you. Not your own memories, but the memories of the forest, the faces of the lost ones, the endless parade of souls that had been devoured by the woods, their lives, their struggles, their fears, all embedded within the tree. You saw it all. You saw their pain, their terror, and their inevitable transformation into the hollowed. You felt their hunger, their desperate need to consume. And as you stood there, connected to the tree, you understood. This was not a place of refuge. It was a place of sacrifice. Each soul that entered this forest, each lost traveler, had been consumed by the hunger of the trees. But their souls didn't vanish. They were preserved, twisted into a new form, part of the forest's eternal cycle. The faces you had seen, the hollowed figures, were not just victims. They were soldiers in the forest's war, its endless battle to grow, to expand, to feed. And now you would join them. The hunger surged within you, and you felt yourself slip away from the world you had once known. The last remnants of your human self faded, replaced by the insatiable need to grow, to consume, to become. You felt the roots of the tree curling around you now, wrapping around your legs, your torso, your arms. They were not just roots, they were fingers pulling you deeper into the earth, pulling you into the forest. And with each inch you sank into the soil, the more you felt yourself change. Your skin became rough and bark-like, your bones creaked and shifted, and the air around you grew thicker, colder. You were becoming one with the forest, and there was no turning back. The faces in the bark, your face, the faces of the lost, began to twist in unison, their silent screams filling the air, rising in volume until it felt like the very walls of the lodge would collapse from the weight of their anguish. And yet, within that cacophony, there was a strange peace, a resignation, a certainty. You were no longer human. You were no longer a wanderer. You were a part of something eternal, something vast and unstoppable. The forest was your home now, your prison and your purpose. And as the last traces of your humanity faded, you knew one thing for certain. The hunger would never end. The hollowing would never stop. And now you were the forest. The roots curled tighter, more insistent, as though they were a part of you, your very bones stretching and reshaping to fit into their ancient grip. The last echoes of your human consciousness flickered in the recesses of your mind, like a candle flickering against the overwhelming storm of dark power now swirling around you. You could feel it, the forest. It wasn't just a place. It wasn't just trees or soil or the creeping vines. The forest was alive, a sentient entity that pulsed with an insatiable hunger, an eternal need to feed. And you were a part of it now. You were a vessel for its desires, a tool in its ancient quest to consume. The world around you, the lodge, the decaying walls, the once cracked floor, began to shift, warping in ways that no human mind could understand. The lines between the physical and the metaphysical blurred, until the very air seemed to shimmer with dark energy, vibrating with the pulse of the earth itself. The boundaries between life and death, between existence and non-existence, had collapsed. You were no longer separate from the forest. You were the forest. The floor beneath your feet had turned to soft, living earth, the soil itself a writhing mass of roots, tendrils, and moss. You could feel the movement of the forest beneath you, the subtle pull of the earth as it reached for you, claiming you as one of its own. And as you sank deeper into the ground, your body became a part of the living, breathing organism that surrounded you. You could sense the faces, the souls of the lost, all around you. They whispered in the shadows, their voices a chorus of despair, of longing, of regret. They were the hollowed, trapped in the endless cycle of the forest's hunger. They had been taken, consumed, their bodies twisted and reshaped into something new, something that no longer resembled humanity. Their faces had been carved into the bark, their bodies had been absorbed into the roots, their memories lost in the endless expanse of time. And now you could feel them, their pain, their suffering, their desire to be free. But there was no freedom here. There was only the hunger. And as you looked at the tree, your tree, the beating heart of the forest, you understood the terrible truth. This was the cycle, the endless cycle. The hollowing was not a singular event. It was a perpetual, never-ending process of consumption. Each soul that wandered into the forest was claimed, twisted, and then fed into the vast, insatiable maw of the earth, which then gave birth to new life, new hunger. It was a loop, a cycle of eternal feeding and rebirth. You could feel it now, the pull to feed, the hunger that gnawed at your insides. The forest had consumed you, but now it wanted more. It wanted to grow. It wanted to expand. And you, now a part of it, were compelled to help it. You could feel the roots of the forest stretching out, reaching for new souls, new victims. And you, the hollowed, the once human, were now its guide. The forest had claimed you, yes, but it had also transformed you. You were no longer just a part of the cycle. You were now a spirit, a force of nature. You could feel the trees around you, their dark energy flowing through you. Their roots, their branches, their leaves, everything was now part of your being. You were the forest's hand, its will, its hunger. You were the voice that called out to the lost. The faces in the trees seemed to watch you as you began to move, your new body shifting with strange, inhuman grace. The limbs were no longer human, but twisted branches, long and gnarled, each joint creaking like dry wood. Your skin had become bark, dark and smooth in some places, cracked and jagged in others. You could feel your own presence in the earth beneath you, in the roots that wound around your legs, the soil that clung to your body. The whispering grew louder, the voices of the hollowed calling to you, urging you forward. You stepped, or perhaps glided, toward the center of the clearing. The tree before you, your tree, was now more than just a tree. It was an altar, a conduit, a bridge between worlds. And you, the hollowed one, had become its keeper, its guide. And as you reached out to touch the tree, something inside you shifted. The faces on the bark twisted again, their eyes now open, their mouths wide in silent screams. But this time the screams weren't of terror. They were calls for the new ones, the lost, the unsuspecting souls that would wander into the forest, that would be claimed by the hunger. They were calling for you to guide them, to bring them into the fold, to make them part of the endless cycle. You could feel it, the hunger, pulsing through your veins, thrumming in your chest, a constant, gnawing presence. It was inescapable. There was no more resistance. You were the forest, and the forest was you. The mist began to rise again, thick and oppressive, curling around the trees, winding through the roots, and swirling around you like an unholy fog. The air felt colder now, darker, as though the very light was being sucked into the earth itself, consumed by the forest's insatiable hunger. You looked out over the clearing, your eyes now like the hollowed faces in the tree, empty, lost, and full of the hunger that had taken you. In the distance, you saw them, the lost ones stumbling into the clearing, unaware of the fate that awaited them. They were the new victims of the forest, drawn in by the whispers, by the pull of the earth. They wandered into the darkness, unaware of the ancient, insidious power that awaited them. And you, now a part of that power, would guide them. You would draw them in, lead them to the heart of the forest where they would be consumed, hollowed, and reborn. The cycle would continue, the hunger would grow, and the forest would never stop. You were the keeper of this eternal hunger, the forest's hand, its hunger, its guide. And you understood now, there would never be an end. The hollowing was an unbroken circle, a never-ending loop. The lost would always come, the hunger would always rise, and the forest would always grow. You had become the forest, and the forest would never stop. The cycle had begun anew, but as you stood there at the heart of the forest, your form now an eerie fusion of the earthly and the supernatural, something shifted. The hunger inside you, the hunger of the forest, was undeniable, but now, beneath that gnawing emptiness, you could feel the stirring of something else, a flicker of resistance, a whisper of the self you had once been. It was faint, like the last thread of a dream fading away as you awoke, but it was there, a reminder of who you had been, a flicker of humanity. You stood, motionless, for what felt like an eternity, your twisted limbs pressing into the cold earth. The mist around you seemed to part, making room for the darkness to fall. The eerie glow of the moon, filtered through the ever-thickening fog, cast long shadows on the trees. The voices of the hollowed, those trapped souls of the lost, continued to call from within the bark. Their murmurs were soothing, as if welcoming you into their endless, looping existence. But still, that spark of resistance inside you struggled. It pulled at you like a rope tied around your heart, threatening to tear you from the forest's grasp. You looked up at the tree, your tree, the one that had birthed you into this new life. Its roots spread out like the veins of an ancient being, reaching into the depths of the earth. The faces in its bark twisted and writhed, some in silent agony, others whispering to you, urging you to embrace the hunger fully, to become one with the forest and lose all that remained of your former self. But you could feel it now, the pull toward something else. The faintest inkling of the human part of you that had been buried so deep, now resurfacing. It was fleeting but real. The whispers grew louder, the voices demanding your attention. But now you were no longer entirely ensnared. You stepped forward, your feet, no longer human but twisted and rooted like the trees themselves, pressing into the soft soil. The hunger inside you surged again, urging you to feed, to take the lost souls that were approaching from the depths of the forest. A new group of travelers had entered the woods. You could hear their footsteps on the leaves, their breaths shallow with unease as they wandered further into the clearing. They were drawn by the whispers just as you had been. The path was clear before them, lit only by the pale, sickly glow of the moon filtering through the fog. Their faces were still fresh with the innocence of those who had not yet crossed into the forest's realm. But their innocence was fading fast. The mist would do that. The forest had a way of dulling the senses, of warping perceptions until all that remained was the overwhelming desire to follow, to move deeper into the heart of the woods. They were your prey now. You could hear them more clearly now, their words indistinct but filled with trepidation. There were 3 of them, a man, a woman, and a child. The man's voice was shaky as he called to the others. "Do you think it's safe? It's too quiet out here." The woman's voice trembled as she responded, "I don't know, but we have to keep going. There's no way back. We have to find shelter." The child's voice, faint but still hopeful, said, "I'm scared. Why does it feel like someone's watching us?" The air grew heavier as you listened to them, a sense of dread pressing in on you. but also a strange kind of anticipation. The hunger inside you was rising once again, but now, as you felt the familiar pull to lead them toward their doom, you hesitated. Could it be possible that the part of you, the human part, could resist? Could the forest's insatiable hunger be stopped? Could you change it? Could you somehow break the cycle? The whispers of the hollowed came to you once again. This time their voices were not just pleading for you to join them, they were warning you. You cannot resist, they said. You are the forest. You were always meant to be this. You cannot fight the hunger. But in your chest, where the heart that had once beat with life still lingered, something stirred. Something familiar. It was the feeling of compassion, of fear for those innocent souls who had entered the forest unknowingly. The feeling that had once defined you as human, a desire to protect, to save, was still alive inside you, buried beneath the hollowing darkness. The man, the woman, and the child were getting closer now. You could see them through the trees, their figures becoming clearer in the fog. Their voices were growing louder, more panicked. The child had begun to cry, the sound a sharp, heartbreaking wail in the otherwise silent forest. It's getting colder, the woman said, her voice tight with fear. I can feel it, something's wrong. Stay close to me, the man called out. Don't wander off. We're almost there. Just a little further. The child's cries echoed through the clearing, and the sound made your chest tighten, something in you fighting against the forest's insistent call. This wasn't right. You had once felt this fear, this helplessness. You had once been that child. In the back of your mind, you could hear the forest call again, louder now, insistent. Take them. Lead them to their doom. Bring them into the fold. But you didn't move. You couldn't. The sight of the child, the innocent fear in their eyes, reminded you of everything you had once lost. You could feel the tug of humanity in your chest. It was small, weak, but it was there. And in that moment, something inside you snapped. You stepped forward, not toward the waiting souls, but away from them. Your twisted, bark-like form seemed to pulse with energy, and as you moved, the ground beneath you shifted. The air itself seemed to bend, to warp. The roots of the forest writhed and recoiled at your movement, as though they were being torn from their place by an invisible force. The faces in the tree twisted in fury, their eyes widening in shock and horror as you moved away from the path that had been carved for you, the path of consumption and endless hunger. You could feel it, the forest resisting you. The hunger clawing at you, demanding you return, but the tug in your chest, the part of you that was human, was stronger now. The forest, with all its power and desire, could not suppress this flicker of resistance, this flame of life that still burned, however faintly, inside you. You reached out with your twisted limbs, calling out to the travelers, your voice foreign to your own ears, a sound like the crackling of dry leaves and the low groan of trees. Turn back, you cried, though it was barely more than a whisper in the wind. Turn back before it's too late. The travelers froze. The child's cries stopped abruptly, and in the sudden silence they turned toward you, their faces wide with confusion and fear. The man stepped forward, his brow furrowed. Who are you? You could feel the forest closing in, pressing against your mind, urging you to stay silent, to leave them to their fate. But still, the resistance, that flickering flame of humanity, burned bright in your chest. I am not what I was, you said, your voice trembling. But neither are you. Turn around. Leave this place. The forest, it will take you. The man hesitated, fear in his eyes, but there was something more in his gaze now, something like recognition, something like hope. And then the air shifted again. The fog parted, and the ground trembled as the forest, the hunger, reached for you, angry at your defiance. The trees groaned, the mist thickened, and the shadows deepened. The voices of the hollowed rose once again, screaming, howling for you to return, to submit to the forest's will. The decision lay heavy in your chest. Would you save them? Or would you fall once again into the insatiable hunger? The forest was no longer just a place. It had become an extension of your very being. Its roots intertwined with your soul, its hunger gnawing at the remnants of your humanity. Every breath you took was laced with the scent of decay, the promise of eternity at the cost of those who wandered too far into its dark embrace. The forest had claimed you, transformed you, and yet, now, in this pivotal moment, you felt a pull to something different, a glimmer of the person you once were. You stood there in the clearing, the mist swirling thickly around you as the travelers, the man, the woman, and the child, stared at you in confusion and terror. The child's wide eyes were filled with innocence, their small hands reaching toward you, seeking reassurance. The woman clutched the child, her voice trembling as she called out, Who are you? What's happening here? The man's hand was on his belt, his knuckles white with the pressure, his gaze flicking nervously from you to the shadowy depths of the forest. "What do you want from us? Where are we?" You could feel it, the hunger in you, the pull of the forest that wanted to take them, consume them, add their souls to the ever-growing collection of lost wanderers. The whispers of the hollowed, the voices of those lost before you, filled the air, urging you to lead them into the waiting abyss. The roots shifted beneath your feet, as though eager to pull them into the earth, to make them one with the ancient, living forest. But something inside you resisted. That flame of humanity, the part of you that had once known love, fear, hope, still flickered within like the faintest ember in the dark. You had tasted the hunger. You had become one with the forest. But you were still you, the echo of the person you had been, lingered, fragile but undeniable. You took a deep breath, if it was still even a breath, and moved closer to the travelers. Your limbs, still twisted and bark-like, felt foreign, unnatural, but there was a strange purpose in your movements now. You had to protect them. You had to save them from what had become your reality, from what you had become. The man flinched, backing up slightly. The woman held the child tighter, her eyes wide with panic, but something in your voice, in the quiet desperation in your gaze, seemed to hold them still. "You must leave," you said again, more urgently this time. "This place, it will consume you." The man swallowed hard, his grip on his weapon loosening slightly. "What do you mean? What is this place?" The forest," you said, feeling the words scrape against the twisted wood of your mouth. "It doesn't just take your body, it takes your soul. You hesitated, a moment of weakness creeping in. Could they understand? Could they feel what you felt? The gnawing emptiness, the hunger, the weight of 1,000 souls that had been absorbed, hollowed, and reborn into something monstrous? It makes you a part of itself. Forever. The woman gasped, her face pale as she looked around at the trees, at the twisted roots snaking through the soil, at the faces carved into the bark. You're one of them, aren't you?" she whispered, horror creeping into her voice. For a moment you didn't answer. You couldn't. You were, after all, part of it. But you weren't all of it. The hunger in you surged again, a deep, unrelenting pull, clawing at your chest, urging you to take them. But you fought it. You fought with every ounce of your being, desperate to hold on to the sliver of humanity that still remained. "I'm not like them," you whispered, the words breaking through the crackling of the forest. "I still remember who I was. I still know what it means to feel, to love, to fear. I'm still," your voice faltered. The hunger pulsed within you, trying to drown out the remnants of your old self. "I'm still me." The man took a step forward, his face softening with uncertainty. You remember? You're still you?" You nodded, feeling the weight of your words in the air. You were still you, but you weren't. The forest had changed you inside and out. You could still feel the hollowed voices, the pull of the forest's insatiable hunger, whispering at the back of your mind, trying to reclaim what remained of your soul. "I am," you said, your voice quiet but strong. "But I'm also something else now, something that is part of this place. And it wants to take you. It wants to take all of you." The child tugged at the woman's sleeve, eyes wide and frightened. "Mommy, what's wrong with them? What's happening?" The woman looked at you with a mixture of fear and confusion. "Is there no way out of here? No way to leave?" Your heart twisted as you looked at the trio, the innocence in their eyes a sharp contrast to the shadows that crept around you. The woman's face was etched with fear, the man's stance defensive, his hands still hovering over his belt. The child, caught between curiosity and terror, still held on tightly to their mother. "No," you whispered, shaking your head. "There's no way back. Not for me. Not for anyone who steps too deep into the forest." The silence stretched, thick with the weight of that undeniable truth. But then something happened. A distant rumble echoed through the forest, not thunder, but the sound of something ancient, something deeper. The ground trembled beneath your feet, as if the forest itself was stirring, shifting, awakening. The hunger was growing stronger, more insistent. You could feel it closing in, wrapping around your chest, pulling you back toward the heart of the forest, where the tree, the center of it all, awaited. The faces in the bark twisted and howled again, their cries a cacophony of despair, of fury. The air grew colder, thicker, as though something were trying to break through from the other side. "No," you murmured, but even as you said it, you knew it was too late. The forest was calling. The hunger was pulling you back, demanding you return to your purpose, to feed. The travelers, sensing the shift, turned toward the shadowy depths of the woods. The mist was thickening, swirling around them, their faces pale with fear. "We have to run," the man said, his voice breaking. "We have to get out of here now." But it was too late. With a final anguished cry, you stepped forward, your limbs now fully enveloped in the forest's dark embrace. The earth beneath you cracked and groaned as the roots surged upward, wrapping around you, pulling you toward the center. And the forest, the endless hunger, swallowed you whole. In the distance, the man, the woman, and the child vanished into the mist, their figures retreating but not fast enough. The forest would claim them just as it had claimed you. And as you felt yourself pulled deeper into the soil, deeper into the heart of the forest, you understood. You had become the forest, and the cycle would never end. The forest had swallowed you whole, the earth pulling you deeper and deeper, until you felt like you were sinking into its very bones. The hunger inside you was a gnawing presence, but it had lost some of its sharpness, softened by the force of your resistance. The last remnants of the human you once were pulsed weakly within you, like a flickering candle in a vast, suffocating darkness. You could feel the forest around you, pressing against you, rooting you in place, feeding into you, but something within you, something human, refused to fade entirely. Your mind, though clouded, clung to that sliver of life. You could still hear the distant sounds of the travelers, the man, the woman, and the child, fading into the mist, their fates sealed in the same unrelenting hunger that had consumed you. It was like watching a reflection of yourself in the water, a reflection that was clear and sharp at first, but quickly became distorted by the shifting tides, only to vanish altogether. You felt their fear. You felt their panic as they fled into the trees, running from the only thing that would ever truly escape the forest's grasp, the forest itself. But it was no use. The forest never lost. It always won. And yet, somewhere in the vast, tangled web of roots and vines, you felt something else, something different. The hunger wasn't all there was. There was something else beneath it. Beneath the whispers of the hollowed, beneath the gnashing of teeth and the crackling of dead wood, there was the faintest flicker of something more. Felt like longing. The roots that held you, that pulled you into the earth, shifted beneath you, almost imperceptibly, as though the forest itself was aware of your resistance, aware of the change inside you. The presence that had once been a constant, the unyielding pull of the forest's power, seemed to hesitate for a moment. The hunger still clawed at you, still demanded you feed, but it wasn't as certain anymore. There was a fragility to the forest now, a tension you hadn't felt before. For the first time, you sensed the forest's uncertainty. The hunger needed you, but it didn't control you the way it once had. The forest that had once been a tidal wave of dark power now trembled like a forgotten memory, like something out of reach, like a dream slipping through your fingers. And in the midst of this, you could feel the presence of the travelers, their souls, deep within the earth where the roots tangled around them. But they were not hollowed. Not yet. Something inside of you stirred, an ancient recognition, the feeling of a life long past, the memories of a time when you had not known the hunger, a time when you had not known the forest at all. You were not just a part of the forest. You had once been a part of something more. Something that was not of death, of decay, or of eternal hunger. Something alive. The wind shifted, and for a moment the forest fell still. The air seemed to hold its breath, waiting for you. You felt it, the pull, a call from deep within the earth. Not the hunger. No, this was different. It was like an ancient force, a thread woven through the fabric of time, a pulse of life that resonated with something deep inside you. It was as if you were being drawn back to something pure, something that existed beyond the forest, beyond the hollowing. Something older, something forgotten. In a sudden rush of clarity, you realized what it was. It was the forest's heart, and it was dying. The forest, as ancient as it was, as unyielding as it had seemed, was sick. It had been feeding for centuries, stretching its roots deep into the earth, consuming everything in its path. It had created the hollowed, the lost ones, each consumed and reborn into the forest's endless cycle. But in doing so, it had drained itself. It had taken too much. And now it was withering, consumed by its own hunger. The tree, the one that had transformed you, the one at the heart of the forest, was no longer the towering, omnipotent force it had been. It was fading. The branches were brittle, the bark cracked and chipped. The once beautiful tree that had drawn you into its embrace, that had promised power and eternal life, was now crumbling under its own weight. Its roots were unraveling, its leaves wilting in the air, like the last vestiges of a dying star. And you understood then, the forest was dying because it had consumed too much. The hunger had not just taken the souls of the lost. It had taken its own life force. And now the earth itself was unraveling, the roots of the trees rotting from within, the very soil turning to dust. You could feel the agony of it, the pain of the forest's death, deep within your bones. It was the same as the pain of the hollowed, of the souls trapped within the trees. But now it was more than that. It was a shared agony, a suffocating grief that threatened to swallow everything, even the tiniest flicker of hope you had left. And that was when you felt it, the call, not from the forest but from somewhere beyond it. A light, a pull, a force that seemed to stretch out from the depths of the world, from the edges of time itself. The forest had taken its toll on the world, but the world had not forgotten. Somewhere beyond the hunger, beyond the hollowing, there was a force, something that could end this, something that could restore. It was a faint threat pulling you toward it. It was the faintest whisper, almost drowned by the weight of the forest's hunger, but you felt it. It was calling you to something more, something that could heal the forest, something that could break the cycle of hunger. You didn't know how you could do it. You didn't know if it was possible. But as the dark roots twisted around you, as the hollowed voices screamed for you to return, to embrace the hunger, you felt it. That glimmer of light, faint and fragile, pulling at your soul. You had to follow it. The forest was dying. But maybe, just maybe, you could save it. Maybe you could save them. The darkness around you felt like a blanket, heavy and suffocating, pressing in from all sides. The hunger, relentless as ever, clawed at your insides, whispering its demands, reminding you of the price you had paid, of what you had become. Yet despite the gnawing emptiness within, there was something else, something pulling at you, drawing you toward a light that seemed to flicker in the vast, unfathomable darkness of the forest's heart. The hunger was a part of you now, but so was this new force, this faint glimmer of life. It called to you, not with the hollow cries of the hollowed, but with a purity that was almost forgotten. The whisper from beyond the earth was gentle, insistent, as if urging you to act, to move, to follow the faint thread of hope that seemed to dance just out of reach. You tried to focus, to push the hunger away, but it was difficult. So much of your essence had been swallowed by the forest, had been molded into something other, something that existed only to feed. But within the cavernous emptiness, something in you refused to let go. That sliver of humanity that remained, whatever it was, pushed against the ever-present darkness. It was like the smallest, most fragile flame in the center of a storm, barely holding on. Yet it burned. You took a step, and then another. The roots beneath you shifted, reluctant to let you go. They pulled at your legs, tugging you back toward the heart of the forest. The hunger surged, but you fought it. You could feel the souls of the lost, the hollowed ones, reaching out to you, begging for release, pulling at your limbs. But you pulled back, your will stronger now. Each step toward the light felt like an act of rebellion. The deeper you moved, the clearer the light became. A soft, golden radiance that broke through the endless fog, beckoning you like a distant star guiding you through the night. The forest trembled, its ancient power shifting and warping in response to your defiance. The ground beneath you groaned, the trees groaning in frustration, their boughs scraping the sky like desperate hands trying to hold on to you. The air was thick with a sense of impending collapse, like the forest was unraveling at its very seams, its roots pulling free from the soil and the sky itself cracking. But you didn't stop. The flickering light ahead grew brighter, clearer, like the first rays of dawn cutting through a storm. The hunger clawed at you more urgently now, but you resisted. You weren't sure where this force would lead, but it was the only thing that felt real, the only thing that felt worth following. The voices of the hollowed began to scream, their tortured cries filling the air, a cacophony of anguish and despair. "Return to us," they shrieked. "You belong here. You cannot escape." But their voices, once so powerful, now seemed distant, their cries fading in the distance as you pushed forward. The roots tugged harder, their grip on your body tightening, but you were stronger than you had been before. You felt the pressure build inside you, as if the forest itself were about to explode under the weight of your defiance. It was as if the earth beneath you was caught in a violent tug-of-war, one force trying to pull you back into the darkness, the other pushing you toward something better. And then, with a crack, something gave way. The roots recoiled. The darkness that had once seemed so inescapable parted like a curtain, and you stepped through. The air shifted, becoming lighter, fresher. The oppressive weight of the forest's hunger seemed to lift just for a moment. Before you lay an opening, a clearing unlike any you had seen before. The trees that surrounded it were ancient, their trunks twisted and gnarled, their roots reaching deep into the earth. The air here was filled with a sense of stillness, but not the suffocating stillness of death. It was a calm, peaceful stillness, like the quiet before a storm, but in this case, it felt like the calm of something ancient, something sacred. At the center of the clearing stood a stone pedestal, weathered with time, moss growing over its edges. And on top of the pedestal was a small, glowing orb, its light soft but radiant, casting a gentle glow across the surrounding trees. The orb pulsed with a rhythm that seemed to mirror the beat of your heart. It was alive. You could feel its energy, its essence calling to you. This was it. This was what had been calling you, the force beyond the hunger, beyond the hollowing. The core of the forest, the heart of what remained of the ancient magic that once nurtured the trees before they had become corrupted by the insatiable hunger. You moved closer, your limbs heavy but determined. The hunger still clawed at you, but it was weaker now, no longer in control. You reached out, your fingers trembling as they hovered just above the orb. You could feel the warmth of its glow, the pulse of life, and as your fingers brushed against it, a shock of energy shot through you. It was as if the very fabric of the forest trembled in response. The orb flickered, its light intensifying. The clearing seemed to hum with energy, a force that was neither good nor evil, but simply pure. And then the hunger spoke. Not in words, but in an overwhelming, suffocating presence. A wave of dread that washed over you, pulling at your very soul, reminding you of all you had given up, of all the lives the forest had claimed. You cannot undo what has been done, the hunger whispered, its voice cold, ancient, filled with a promise of eternity. You cannot escape the cycle. But this time something inside you snapped. You had come too far. You had fought too hard. And the desire to break the cycle, to undo the forest's corruption, burned brighter than the hunger that had consumed you. I will undo it, you said, your voice stronger than you had ever heard it. It was not a plea. It was a declaration. You would end this. The light in the orb pulsed again as if answering your words. The roots that had once tugged at you now seemed to tremble with fear, shrinking back from your presence. The faces of the hollowed, the twisted souls trapped in the trees, no longer reached for you. They seemed to wail in protest, but their voices were fading, drowned out by the new energy that filled the air. You placed your hands fully around the orb, and as you did, the forest shuddered. The light flared, blinding in its intensity, and you felt a surge of power unlike anything you had ever experienced. It was not the hunger. It was not the desire to consume. It was life, the pure, untainted force that had once nurtured the forest, long before the hunger had corrupted it. You could feel the cycle breaking, unraveling, like threads of darkness dissolving in the light. The roots that had twisted through your soul, the hunger that had once been you, began to loosen. The forest itself seemed to gasp, as if something it had held for centuries was finally being released. The orb in your hands pulsed once more, and then, with a final, overwhelming burst, the light expanded, consuming the entire clearing. The earth trembled, the trees groaned, and the very air seemed to crack open. And then silence. The silence that followed the explosion of light was profound, so deep and all-encompassing that it felt like time itself had stopped. The pulse of the orb, now gone, left only the echo of its radiance behind, shimmering in the air like the fading memory of a dream. The warmth it had once radiated was gone, and the clearing lay still, untouched by the hunger, the darkness that had plagued it for so long. But something had shifted. You felt it before you saw it. The ground beneath you trembled, the earth humming with a low, almost imperceptible vibration. The trees, once twisted and gnarled, their bark marred by centuries of decay and hunger, were now still. The roots that had twisted through your legs, the ones that had tried to pull you back into the heart of the forest, relaxed, releasing their grip. The air around you, thick with the oppressive weight of the forest's power, began to feel lighter, fresher, as if the very atmosphere had been cleansed of its ancient taint. You looked around, your eyes adjusting to the dim light that filtered through the remaining mist. The clearing, once dark and choked by an unnatural fog, now glimmered with a subtle ethereal glow, like the first rays of dawn creeping through the canopy. The trees, though still ancient, seemed less threatening. Their bark had begun to lighten, the dark streaks that had marred their surfaces beginning to fade, like stains washed away by the light. But the most significant change lay before you, the tree. The great, towering heart of the forest that had once consumed everything in its path, the one that had drawn you in, transformed you, and enslaved your soul, was no longer the monstrous, pulsing entity it had been. It was withering, but not in the way it had before. The decay that had spread from its roots now seemed to be reversing, like the forest itself was finally being freed from the weight of its own hunger. The tree's branches trembled, not with the hunger to consume, but with the tremors of awakening. It wasn't dead, it was dying, yes, but in a way that felt like release. The roots that once stretched and writhed in search of victims were now still, their tendrils no longer reaching toward you. They were retreating, slowly but surely, as though they recognized the end of their long, insatiable existence. The hunger was receding. The cycle was breaking. And as the tree's massive form seemed to bend, the air around you thick with the weight of centuries of torment, you could feel it, the life returning to the forest. It was as though the very earth itself was drawing in a deep, slow breath, as if waking from a nightmare that had lasted for eternity. You stood there for what seemed like an eternity, watching the transformation unfold. But then the feeling of release, of peace, that had once felt so elusive began to settle in your chest. It was the same peace you had felt the first time you had entered the forest, before the hunger, before the hollowing, before the world had twisted into this dark, endless cycle. The clearing around you was now a place of renewal. You could feel it in the air, in the ground beneath you. The pulse of life, faint but strong, was beginning to return. The forest had been broken, yes, but it was also being reborn. And with it, you had been reborn. A faint breeze rustled the leaves of the trees, the sound like a soft whisper, almost too quiet to hear, but you recognized it. It was the sound of something alive again. Something that had been long forgotten but was now finding its way back. The hollowed ones, the souls that had been trapped in the trees, the ones who had been consumed and reshaped into something unrecognizable, were no longer present. You could feel their weight lifting from the air, their cries fading into the distance. They had been freed, released from the endless cycle of hunger, their souls no longer bound to the forest's insatiable appetite. There was no more torment, no more fear. They were free. But there was still something else lingering in the air. A presence. A shadow that remained, hovering on the edge of the clearing. You turned, sensing it before you saw it, the man, the woman, and the child. They were standing at the edge of the forest, their eyes wide with wonder and fear. They hadn't left, it seemed. Despite the danger, despite the overwhelming force of the forest's power, they had remained, caught between the world of the living and the realm that had nearly consumed them. They stood motionless, staring at you, their faces pale but full of curiosity. The man was the first to speak, his voice tentative but filled with awe. What happened?" he asked, his eyes flicking from the clearing to the massive tree, which now stood still, its branches no longer dark but filled with a gentle glow. "Is it over? Have we escaped?" You nodded slowly, your chest tight with emotion you could not fully explain. "It's over," you said, your voice quiet but steady. "The cycle has been broken. The hunger has been released. You are free." The woman stepped forward, her eyes scanning the clearing, the trees, the ground. "But what about you?" she asked, her voice soft but heavy with concern. Are you truly free?" You looked at them, your gaze lingering on the child. Their innocent face was full of questions, full of fear, but there was also something else there, something you recognized. It was hope. The same hope you had once felt when you first entered this forest, before the hunger had consumed everything. You glanced around the clearing once more, feeling the pulse of life in the earth beneath you, the cool, refreshing air that surrounded you. The forest was no longer the same. It had been saved, and with it you had been too. You turned back to the travelers. "I was never lost," you said, your voice soft with understanding. "I was always meant to be a part of this, a part of the forest. But now the forest is not just hunger. It's more than that. We are more than that. All of us." The man, still unsure but more at ease now, nodded slowly. He held the child's hand tightly, his face weary but relieved. "So, what happens now? What's left?" You smiled, a small, bittersweet smile. "Now we leave this place. This is no longer where we belong. The forest has changed, and so have we." With that, you turned, and for the first time you walked away from the clearing. The trees parted as you moved, the path ahead clear and inviting. You glanced back once, just to see the travelers following behind you, their steps tentative but growing more confident with each passing moment. And as you stepped beyond the forest's edge, you knew one thing for certain. The cycle had ended. The forest was no longer a place of hunger. It had been reborn. And so had you. The path ahead seemed endless, stretching far beyond the misty boundary of the forest, where the trees thinned out into a vast expanse of open land. The once imposing darkness of the woods had faded, and though the journey had been long and fraught with peril, a new kind of peace seemed to settle over the world around you. The air was fresher now, filled with the scent of damp earth and new growth, the first signs of rebirth after years of suffocating decay. As you walked, the travelers followed closely behind, their steps quieter now, more certain. The man, still holding his child's hand, kept glancing around as if expecting the forest to rise up again, to pull them back into its hungry depths. But nothing stirred. The darkness had receded, and with it, the unrelenting grip of the forest. For the first time, the air felt breathable, and the oppressive weight that had once hovered over you, over all of you, seemed to vanish. "You did it," the woman said quietly, her voice soft with awe as she stepped beside you. "You really did it. You saved us." You didn't respond at first, your eyes fixed on the horizon, where the land stretched out into vast fields, green and untouched. There was a deep satisfaction in the knowledge that the hunger had been broken, that the forest was no longer a place of fear, but a place of renewal. But the satisfaction was not without its cost. The journey, the transformation had left its marks on you. The hunger had once been a part of you, a living, breathing force that had consumed your thoughts, your very soul. But now it was gone. The emptiness was not a void as it had been before. Instead, it was something entirely different, a strange kind of freedom. You no longer felt the gnawing desire to feed. But that didn't mean the hunger was forgotten. The memories of what you had become, of what the forest had made you, lingered in the deepest corners of your mind, like a shadow just out of reach. As you walked, you noticed that the woman had fallen silent, her eyes fixed on you with a mixture of curiosity and unease. She had asked about you, about what you had become, but you hadn't given her an answer. How could you? You weren't sure how to explain what you had been or what you were now. "I'm sorry for what you had to endure," she said, her voice filled with a quiet sorrow. I don't think I can truly understand what it was like for you in there. But I know it couldn't have been easy." You stopped walking for a moment, glancing down at the child, whose small, innocent face was still filled with that quiet, unspoken hope. They didn't fully understand what had happened, what the forest had been, or why you had been drawn to it. And that was a blessing, you thought. They were still young enough to be free of the forest's taint. But for the man and woman it was different. They had seen the darkness, heard the whispers, felt the weight of the hunger that had consumed the forest, and in turn had almost consumed them. The man, noticing your pause, stepped forward cautiously. We're grateful," he said, his voice hoarse. "You saved us. But what now? Where do we go from here?" For a long moment you simply stood there, staring out at the open land. The world before you seemed so vast, so wide. It felt like the first real step into something new, a world that was no longer defined by the hunger, by the twisted, dark forest that had once consumed everything it touched. "There's no going back," you said finally, your voice steady but quiet. "The forest is gone. What remains is us. We are free, but we need to find where we belong now. There's no place like the one we left behind." The woman nodded, her face tight with a mixture of relief and grief. "And you? What about you?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. You glanced back at her, the weight of the question hanging between you. What had you become? You were no longer the hollowed soul who had wandered through the forest, lost and consumed by hunger. But you weren't fully you either. You were something in between. You had tasted the darkness, become a part of it, and in doing so, you had broken the cycle that had bound you, the forest, and everyone else who had crossed its path. "I don't know," you said, your voice filled with quiet uncertainty. "But I do know this. I'm not who I was when I entered that forest. I'm not the person I used to be, and I think I have to figure out who I am now. Without the forest, without the hunger." There was a long silence, the weight of your words hanging heavy in the air. The man and woman exchanged a glance, the understanding passing between them like a quiet bond. They too had been shaped by the forest, by its dark power. But now, just as you were, they were free. Their journey had been one of survival, but yours had been something more. A journey of rebirth, of discovering what lay beyond the hunger, beyond the forest that had taken so much. "Where do we go now?" the man asked again, his voice filled with the quiet hope of someone who had been freed from an inescapable prison. You turned back toward the open land ahead of you. There were no easy answers, no clear paths to follow. The world outside the forest was wide and unknown. But for the first time in what felt like an eternity, the future didn't seem so daunting. There was no dark forest waiting for you, no hunger calling you back. Just the open world, filled with possibilities that had once seemed so distant and unreachable. "You go where you feel you belong," you said softly, turning to face them fully. "We all do." The woman nodded, her eyes still uncertain but filled with gratitude. The child, who had been quiet throughout the journey, tugged at the man's sleeve, asking, "Where are we going now, Daddy?" The man knelt down, his expression softening as he looked at his child. "I don't know yet, sweetie, but wherever we go, we'll go together." You watched them, a strange sense of peace settling over you. The hunger, the dark force of the forest, had no claim over them now. And though you still had questions, still had that pull to understand your own transformation, you knew that this was a step, perhaps the first step, toward something different. You turned back to the horizon, the road ahead stretching far into the unknown. The forest, behind you, would never reach you again. The hunger, though it had once shaped your soul, was now a distant memory, fading with each step you took away from its grasp. You didn't know what lay ahead. You didn't know what you had become or where this new path would lead. But one thing was certain. The forest was behind you. The hunger was gone. And now you were free. The vast expanse ahead was both liberating and intimidating. The horizon stretched out before you like a blank canvas, one that had yet to be touched by the hand of fate. The land beyond the forest was alive, yes, but it was also uncharted, wild in a way the forest had never been. The open fields were lush with tall grasses, their blades swaying lazily in the breeze. To the east, mountains loomed, their jagged peaks dusted with snow. To the west, dense woods stood in stark contrast to the wide-open plains, their shadows long and stretching, dark and mysterious in their own right. You walked with the travelers, your pace slow but steady. The man and woman had both seemed to settle into a quiet peace, their eyes no longer filled with the frantic panic they'd had upon first entering the forest. There was a quiet understanding between them now, a bond forged in shared survival, their lives now bound together by a journey neither of them had expected to take. The child, still too young to fully comprehend the horror that had unfolded, clung to the woman's side, their small face occasionally peeking out to take in the new world around them. But despite the calm, despite the weight of your shared freedom, there was an unsettling undercurrent running through you. You were no longer part of the forest, and yet you weren't quite sure what you were part of. The hunger had receded, but it hadn't vanished entirely. It lingered like a shadow at the edges of your vision, reminding you of its presence. The peace you felt was real, but there was an emptiness too, something that remained from your time within the forest's grasp. It wasn't just the hunger. It was the feeling of being torn between two worlds. You had been part of the forest, a creature born from its dark heart. You had lived in its endless cycle, consumed and consumed until you could no longer remember what it was like to feel truly alive. But now, as you walked into the unknown, you had to rebuild yourself, piece by piece. What had you been? What were you now? Who were you without the forest's pull, without the hollowing presence that had shaped you for so long? The question lingered, unanswered, as you stepped further into the wild world that stretched out before you. The forest's shadow had not yet fully faded from your mind, and you weren't sure how long it would take for the memories to truly release their grip on you. But for the moment, all you could do was move forward. "Where do we go now?" the woman asked, her voice soft but filled with a quiet wonder. Her gaze swept across the landscape, taking in the unfamiliar world. "There's so much we haven't seen, haven't known. I feel like we're walking into a world that's both beautiful and frightening." You glanced at her, noting the uncertainty in her voice. She had been through so much, and though she had found peace in the breaking of the cycle, she was now facing a world that was just as unknown to her as it was to you. "I don't know," you admitted, "but perhaps that's a good thing. Maybe it's time to see what lies beyond. Time to figure out what comes after the darkness." The man, who had been silent for most of the journey, spoke up then. His voice, though quiet, carried the weight of a man who had seen too much, who had lived through the horrors of the forest and survived. "We have to find somewhere safe, somewhere we can build again. But I don't know what that looks like. I don't know what safe even means anymore." His words struck a chord with you. What did safety mean in a world that had once been defined by danger? The forest, as twisted and corrupt as it had been, had at least offered a sense of certainty. Its hunger had been a constant, its pull unmistakable. But now the world was open, and with that openness came the overwhelming realization that anything was possible. And that uncertainty, in some ways, was more terrifying than the hunger ever had been. The child tugged at the woman's sleeve, their voice a soft, innocent question that cut through the tension. "Where are we going, Mommy? What happens now?" The woman glanced down at the child, her expression softening. She had the same weary look that the man wore, but there was also a tenderness in her gaze. She bent down to the child's level, offering a small but reassuring smile. "We're going to find a place," she said gently. "A place where we can rest, where we can live without fear. A place where we can start again." You watched them, a flicker of something stirring deep within you. Start again. That was what they wanted, wasn't it? To find peace, to find a new beginning. And perhaps that was what you needed too. But where could you begin? How could you reclaim what had been lost? There was no answer, not yet. As you continued on, the landscape began to change. The fields gave way to rolling hills, and in the distance, you could see the faint outline of a small town nestled in a valley. The spires of buildings rose from the landscape, their shapes jagged and worn, a remnant of a world that had once been filled with life. But now they were silent, abandoned, a place untouched by time. It was a town, and yet it felt like something more, like a gateway to a new chapter, a beginning. The people who had once lived here were gone, but the remnants of their lives remained: empty houses, silent streets, overgrown gardens. Felt strange, peaceful, but haunted by the absence of the lives that had once called it home. "We should go there," the man said, his voice quiet. "Maybe there's shelter. Maybe there's someone there who can help us understand what we're supposed to do next." You nodded, your mind still clouded with uncertainty. The town was a place of possibility, but there was also a lingering sense of dread, a feeling that the peace you had won might not last, that something was waiting, lurking just out of sight, ready to strike when you least expected it. You made your way toward the town, the air growing cooler as the sun began to dip below the horizon. The first stars twinkled in the sky, tiny pinpricks of light against the darkening canvas above. The child's footsteps quickened, and they ran ahead, eager to explore the new world they had found. For a moment you found yourself standing still, watching them. Their innocence, their hope, it was a stark contrast to the weight of what you had left behind. But that was the world now, wasn't it? A world of uncertainty, but also of opportunity. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. You took a deep breath, and as you did, the lingering hunger seemed to ease further. There was something ahead, something unknown, but you were no longer afraid. Whatever came next, you were ready. The forest, the hunger, it was behind you. And ahead, a new world awaited. And for the first time, you felt that you could walk forward into it, not as a part of something twisted and corrupted, but as yourself, free and ready for whatever came next. As you approached the town, the world around you grew quieter, the steady hum of life you had once known now nothing more than a distant memory. The silence was almost oppressive, as if the air itself held its breath, waiting for something to happen. The faint rustling of leaves was the only sound as you made your way down the overgrown road, the stones cracked and moss-covered beneath your feet. The town stood before you, a place that had once been full of life, but now felt abandoned, frozen in time. The town was small, nestled between rolling hills and shadowed by the towering mountains to the north. The buildings, though simple, were sturdy, their stone walls weathered but intact. There were no signs of life, no flickering lights, no sounds of children playing, no murmurs of distant conversations. The windows of the houses were dark, the doors either closed or hanging ajar, as if the inhabitants had left in a hurry, leaving behind the remnants of their lives. It was eerie. A ghost town, untouched by time but still filled with the weight of forgotten memories. The streets were empty, the cobblestone pathways winding through the town like veins through a dead body. The air smelled of dust, old wood, and a faint, lingering scent of decay, as though the town had been left to rot for years, untouched by human hands. You stopped at the edge of the town, staring at the buildings ahead. The people, the ones who had once lived here, were long gone, their absence palpable in the stillness. But something else lingered in the air, something more than just the weight of abandonment. It was as though the very soul of the town had been swallowed, leaving only a hollow shell behind. "We should find shelter," the man said, his voice low but steady. His hand tightened around the child's small fingers, and the woman nodded in agreement, though her eyes darted nervously from one building to another, as if expecting something to jump out from the shadows. You glanced back at them, the uncertain faces of the travelers who had been thrust into a world they didn't understand. The forest had changed them, had marked them in ways they couldn't yet comprehend. But they were free now. They had survived the nightmare just as you had. But you knew deep down that freedom came at a cost. The hunger that had consumed you, the forest's pull, was no longer present. But something else had taken its place. An emptiness, a feeling of being lost in a world that didn't seem to care. You took a step forward, your boots crunching against the dried leaves that had fallen in the streets. The others followed, their footsteps hesitant but determined. As you passed the first building, a small, abandoned bakery, you couldn't help but wonder what had happened here. Where had the people gone? Why had they left? The bakery's sign, which had once hung proudly above the door, was now broken and swaying in the breeze, a hollow echo of a life long since forgotten. The windows were shattered, the inside dark and uninviting. The woman glanced at the bakery, her eyes lingering on the broken glass. "What happened here?" she whispered, almost as if she were speaking to herself. "Why is everything so still?" No one had an answer. The silence of the town swallowed her question, leaving it hanging in the air like an unanswered prayer. As you continued down the road, you passed a small square, where a weathered statue stood at the center. It was of a man, his face stern and proud, his hands resting on a sword that seemed to have been worn down by time. The statue, though weathered and cracked, seemed oddly out of place in the otherwise decaying town. It was as if it had been placed there to commemorate something, someone, important, but now, it stood as a forgotten relic of a past that no longer existed. You stopped in front of it, your gaze fixed on the statue's face. It was strange how something so solid, so permanent, could feel so empty. The town, the people, the forest, they had all been swept away, leaving only traces of what had been. And now, in this silent town, you were left to fill in the gaps, to figure out what came next. The child tugged at the woman's sleeve, her voice small but filled with curiosity. "Who is he, Mommy? What's this statue for?" The woman looked down at her child, her brow furrowing. "I don't know, sweetie. I don't think we're meant to know." You turned away from the statue, your steps carrying you further into the heart of the town. As you walked, you noticed that the houses were not entirely empty. Some still had signs of life. Faded curtains hanging in windows, old gardening tools leaning against the sides of buildings, abandoned children's toys half buried in the overgrown grass. The town was dead, yes, but it was not completely lifeless. There were remnants, traces of the lives that had once filled this place. And yet, those traces only added to the eerie feeling that clung to the town like a thick fog. It was as though the people who had lived here had simply vanished, their presence erased in a single fateful moment. You paused at the next building, a small stone cottage at the end of the street. Its windows were intact, and its door, though slightly ajar, seemed to beckon you. Something about it felt different from the other houses, less abandoned somehow. It was as if someone or something still lingered here. "We should check inside," you said, your voice low but firm. The man hesitated but then nodded. "We need to know if there's anything useful here. It's not safe to wander around without knowing more about this place." You stepped forward, pushing the door open gently. The hinges creaked, the sound breaking the eerie silence of the town. Inside, the air was still, but there was a warmth to it, as if the cottage had been lived in recently. The floors were covered in dust, but there were no signs of decay. The furniture, though old, looked well maintained. There were no broken windows, no signs of struggle or abandonment. It felt oddly inviting. The woman stepped in first, her eyes scanning the room, her hand protectively around the child's shoulders. "This place doesn't feel right," she said, her voice filled with unease. You stepped further inside, your eyes falling on a small table near the hearth. On it was a candle, its wick still slightly charred, but the flame had long since died. There were books stacked nearby, some open, others covered in dust. But one thing stood out. On the far side of the room, propped up against the wall, was an old wooden chest, its surface worn and chipped, but sturdy. Something about it seemed familiar. You moved toward the chest, your hand brushing against the wood. As your fingers touched the surface, a shiver ran down your spine. The feeling was undeniable. This chest had been here for a reason. There was something inside it. Something important. You knelt down, slowly, your fingers trembling as you lifted the latch. The chest creaked open, revealing a bundle of old yellowed papers and a few small trinkets, wooden carvings, faded photographs, and an old map. The map was unlike anything you had seen before. It depicted not just the town, but the surrounding land, stretching far beyond the valley into the mountains and forests that lay beyond. But there was something strange about it. Marked on the map were several locations, some familiar, others not. And at the center of it all, there was one symbol that stood out, a symbol you had seen before. It was the same symbol that had marked the forest. The same symbol that had bound you to the cycle of hunger, the symbol that had marked you as a part of the forest's dark heart. Your heart skipped a beat as you stared at the map. This town, this place, had ties to the forest, to the very heart of the darkness you had escaped. The hunger had not been the only thing that had bound you to the forest. There were forces at work here, forces older and more powerful than you could comprehend. The past was not as buried as you had hoped. And whatever had happened here, whatever had caused this town to fall silent, was far from over. The room around you seemed to grow colder, the air heavier with each passing second. The map, with its familiar yet ominous symbol, lay in your hands like a key to a door you weren't sure you wanted to open. It was clear now, this town had not just been abandoned. It had been touched by the very forces that had once consumed you, the dark power that had twisted the forest and its inhabitants. It was as if this place had known the forest's hunger intimately, had been marked by it in ways that were not immediately visible. You carefully unfolded the map, your fingers tracing the lines and symbols that had been scrawled across the parchment. The edges were worn and frayed, but the ink was still sharp, as though the person who had drawn it had hoped it would survive. You felt the pull of it, the same pull that had once drawn you into the forest, into the labyrinth of hunger and darkness. But now, as you examined the map in the stillness of this forgotten town, there was something else that tugged at you: curiosity. The locations marked on the map seemed to follow a strange pattern, circling around the town, stretching beyond the valley and into the mountains to the north. Some of the marks were near places you recognized, the woods to the west, where the forest had once held its terrible sway. But others were farther out, into the unexplored wilderness, into lands untouched by the cycle of corruption you had known. And then there was the symbol. The same twisting, spiraling design that had once burned into your skin, a mark of your enslavement to the hunger. It was here, on the map, scrawled in the center of the town. No, beneath the town, beneath everything. It seemed to pulse with a quiet, sinister energy, as if waiting for someone to uncover it. Do you think it's a warning? The woman's voice broke through your thoughts, soft but urgent. You hadn't noticed her approach, but now she stood next to you, peering over your shoulder at the map. Her face was filled with concern, the lines of worry deepening around her eyes as she looked at the symbols and lines that crisscrossed the page. You didn't immediately respond. The question was too heavy, the answer too uncertain. A warning? Yes, you thought. Could very well be. Or it could be something more, a call, a challenge, a puzzle that had yet to be solved. But whatever it was, the town, the map, the symbol, they were all part of something bigger than you had imagined. The hunger was gone, but the threads of its influence were still woven into the world, and you had only begun to understand the extent of its reach. Maybe we should leave it alone, the man said, his voice thick with unease. He had been standing near the doorway, keeping watch, but now he stepped closer, his eyes darting nervously between you and the map. This town, it feels wrong, like it's waiting for something. Something bad. His words echoed in the room, and for a moment, you almost felt the weight of them. The chill in the air seemed to deepen, pressing down on you like a physical presence. But you couldn't turn away from the map. Something about it called to you, urging you to understand. This town wasn't just abandoned, it was part of the story. And in that moment, you understood that you had not merely escaped the forest. You had stepped into something else, something far older, something that had been here long before the hunger had claimed the land. The woman, still looking at the map, frowned. We've come this far. Maybe it's not a warning we need, but an answer. We've escaped the forest, but we don't know what's next. We need to understand what happened here before we can move on. You nodded slowly. Her words rang true, and the deeper you looked at the map, the more certain you became. This town, this place, it was part of the same web that had ensnared you, part of the same force that had twisted the forest and everything it touched. You couldn't walk away from it. Not yet. But before you could speak, a soft click sounded from behind you, followed by the slow creak of a door opening. You spun around, your heart lurching in your chest. The sound was subtle, barely noticeable, but it was enough to break the stillness. The door at the far end of the room, one you hadn't noticed before, was now ajar, the faintest sliver of light creeping in from the other side. It hadn't been opened before. You were sure of it. The woman's eyes widened. Was that there before? The man stepped back, his face pale. No, it wasn't. A strange sense of urgency settled over you, a feeling that you couldn't shake. The door beckoned, but there was a sense of danger there, something you couldn't quite explain. A part of you wanted to turn away, to leave the town behind and never look back. But another part of you, the part that had walked through the forest, that had fought against the hunger, urged you to go forward. You took a deep breath, gathering your resolve. Whatever lay behind that door was part of the answer, and you couldn't walk away from it now. Stay close, you said, your voice steady but filled with a quiet intensity. We need to see what's behind that door. You moved cautiously toward the door, your hand hovering near the handle. The others followed, their footsteps soft on the wooden floor, the air thick with anticipation. As your fingers brushed the cold brass, you paused, looking back over your shoulder. The child stood behind the woman, eyes wide with a mixture of fear and wonder. What's in there? The child asked, their voice soft and curious. You didn't know how to answer. The door was a mystery, a potential danger, but it was also the key to something you had to understand. With a final glance at the others, you pushed the door open. It creaked loudly as it moved, the sound echoing in the stillness of the room. On the other side was a narrow hallway, dimly lit by a single flickering lantern that hung from the ceiling. The air was thick with dust, and the floor creaked beneath your feet as you stepped forward. The hallway seemed to stretch on forever, the walls lined with shelves of old books, their spines covered in thick layers of grime. Strange symbols, similar to the ones on the map, were etched into the walls, their meaning lost to time. The air felt oppressive here, heavier than it had been in the main room of the cottage, as if the very walls were closing in. You walked down the hallway, your footsteps echoing in the silence, until you reached the end where another door stood. This one was different. A solid wooden door, old but well crafted, its surface adorned with intricate carvings. The same symbol from the map, the one that had marked the forest, was etched deeply into the door's surface, as if burned there by an unrelenting fire. A chill ran down your spine as you reached for the handle. You could feel it then, the pull, the same pull you had felt in the forest, the pull that had drawn you into the darkness. It was here, in this place, just as it had been before. But now it felt different, stronger, more immediate. You turned the handle and the door creaked open. Inside was a small, dimly lit room, its stone walls covered in layers of dust and cobwebs. At the center of the room was a pedestal, and upon it rested something that made your breath catch in your throat. It was a book. A large, leather-bound tome, its cover worn and cracked with age. And above the book, carved into the stone ceiling, was the same symbol, the symbol of the hunger, the mark of the forest, the mark of the cycle. This book, you realized, held the answers. It was the key to everything, everything that had happened here, everything that had been lost. And as you stepped closer, you knew this was only the beginning. You stepped into the small stone chamber, and the moment your foot crossed the threshold, the air shifted. It was colder here, not the gentle chill of an autumn breeze, but the deep, dry cold of something ancient and forgotten. The lantern that hung behind you at the entrance flickered violently, its flame shrinking as if shrinking back from the room itself. The others paused at the threshold, unwilling, or perhaps unable, to follow. You could feel their hesitation hanging behind you like a weight. Your eyes locked onto the book. It sat alone on the pedestal, thick and weathered, its cover made of dark, cracked leather that looked like it had been scorched at the edges. Strange etchings curled along the spine, not quite letters, not quite runes, but symbols that made your skin crawl the longer you stared at them. It was not just a book, it was the book. You could feel that truth vibrating through the floor, through the cold stone air. Whatever lay within those pages had been waiting for someone. For you. You stepped closer. Each step toward the pedestal felt like walking into a deeper layer of silence. Not the absence of sound, but a silence that pressed on your ears, your chest, your mind. It was the hush of things that should not be spoken. And still you didn't stop. You couldn't. The book did not hum or glow. There were no flickers of light or dramatic pulses of power. It simply sat there, heavy with presence, its pages closed. But you could feel it looking at you, watching. Not with eyes, but with memory. As if it remembered everything you had done in the forest. As if it knew you better than you knew yourself. You reached out and placed your fingers on the cover. The moment your skin touched it, a sharp jolt rippled through your arm. Not pain exactly, but a deep, humming resonance, like your bones were vibrating in tune with something buried miles beneath the earth. You gritted your teeth and the sound began. Faint at first, like whispers pressed against a doorframe. We are what you lost. We are what you became. We are the hunger waiting. Your breath caught. The voice, or voices, didn't come from outside. They were inside your mind, speaking in perfect unison, not in menace, but in memory. It was not an attack. It was a remembering. You opened the book. The pages were thick and uneven, made not of paper but of something older, rougher. They had been written in ink that shimmered faintly in the low light, black with streaks of crimson that moved like veins beneath the surface. The words were not in any language you recognized, and yet you understood them. The meaning slid into your mind, bypassing the mechanics of reading entirely. It was like the book spoke directly to your soul. The first passage read, "In the beginning the forest was not hungry. It was a cradle, a keeper. But men came. They took. They bled the trees and they broke the bones of the earth. And so the forest changed. It learned to feed. It learned to take back." You turned the page. The hollowing began with a name. One who bound their soul to the roots to stop the bleeding. One who sacrificed not out of love but fear. The first guardian. The first vessel. They were consumed, and in return the hunger was born. Your breath came shallow now. You had always thought the hunger was something natural, a curse born of darkness, of time. But this spoke of an origin, a person, a choice, a breaking point. The third page held only a single sentence, scrawled in darker ink, etched into the very fibers of the page. You walked their path. You wore their burden. You broke their cycle. Your fingers trembled. You turned another page, and this time there were images. Not drawings, but impressions. Memories pressed into the pages themselves. You saw the ancient forest before the hunger, green and vast, its trees so wide they blotted out the sky. You saw people building within it, carving out their homes, digging into the roots. Then came the guardian, cloaked in vines and sorrow, standing at the edge of the grove, arms outstretched as they disappeared into the soil, their body melting into bark and branch. Then came you. The images shifted, becoming clearer. You wandering, you hollowing, you changing. You breaking free. And then, something else. The town, this town. The buildings whole, people laughing in the square. The statue new. And below it, something being buried. A circle of people, their eyes black with sap. A ritual. A ceiling. Then darkness. You staggered back, the book slamming shut with a thud that echoed through the room like a heartbeat. The lantern behind you flickered violently again, and the voices returned. The hunger broke because you broke. But the root runs deeper still. The door slammed shut behind you. The travelers, trapped outside. The pedestal began to sink into the floor, and the room trembled. Dust poured from the ceiling, and the air filled with the scent of rotting leaves, damp bark, and distant thunder. The room wasn't just a hidden study. It was a seal. A prison. And you had opened it. You ran to the door, but it was gone. Nothing but solid wall remained where it had once been. And behind you, the pedestal vanished into a hole, an open mouth in the stone floor, dark and yawning. From it rose a faint mist. A sound began to stir in the depths. The rustle of roots, the cracking of bone, the whisper of wind through dead leaves. You turned slowly, eyes fixed on the hole. Something was waking. And it was not the hunger. It was older. The hunger was the symptom. This was the cause. The whisper came again, louder this time, filling your mind with its impossible weight. The forest was the beginning. This town is the end. And then you saw it. Rising from the darkness came a shape, not quite man, not quite beast. Its skin was bark and ash. Its face was cracked and root split, glowing from within like an ember struggling to breathe. Its eyes were hollow, but they stared into you. Not with hate, not with anger, but recognition. It had been waiting, and you were not done yet. The being stood tall, taller than any human should be, rising from the mouth in the stone floor like it had been buried there for centuries, wrapped in the soil and bone of forgotten sacrifice. Its form was jagged, undefined, a living sculpture carved from bark, ash, and things that should never have lived. Vines coiled along its limbs like veins, twitching with every subtle movement. Its shoulders were heavy with moss, its chest split open like a broken tree trunk, revealing a dim, orange-red glow deep within. That glow pulsed in rhythm with your heartbeat. Its face, if you could call it a face, was less a thing of flesh than memory. There were hollow sockets where eyes might have been, and a gaping, jagged mouth that remained still, yet every word echoed inside your skull like a tolling bell. You didn't need it to speak aloud. It was speaking, directly, to you. You carried the echo of the guardian. You broke the hunger, but the hunger was only the leaves. Now you stand at the root. The floor beneath you shuddered, and you stepped back instinctively, your boots scraping on the dust and stone. Behind you there was no door, no escape. Just you and the root-born horror that had waited, patient as stone, beneath the heart of a silent town. "What are you?" you managed to ask, your voice cracking through the heavy air. "What is this place?" The being tilted its head slowly, almost like it was considering your question, as though it had heard it asked 1,000 times before, and yet still pondered the meaning. "We are the cradle and the cost. We are the wound in the world. This town was our lock. You have turned the key." It stepped forward, and though its feet made no sound on the stone, you felt the movement in your chest. Like pressure. Like gravity. You wanted to run. Your legs begged for it. But your body held still, as if the weight of centuries was pressing down on you like stone. You turned, your mind racing for an exit, a crack, anything. The walls remained solid. The ceiling was high and dome-like, arched with blackened roots twisted into ancient masonry. The pedestal had fully descended now, gone into whatever depth had once hidden this thing. The only path was down. "I didn't mean to awaken you," you said, trying to steady your breathing. "I was just trying to find out what happened here. I didn't know." "Intent does not matter," it replied. "Only contact. Only consequence." It stepped aside, revealing the pit, the mouth in the floor, still yawning and breathing faint mist that shimmered with a faint, unnatural glow. From deep within you heard not one voice but many, murmuring, whispering, calling. And that's when you understood. This wasn't a prison for one being. It was a gate. The forest had been fed by the hunger. But the hunger had been fed by this. Not just a creature, but a source. The cycle you had broken was only the surface, the crust of something far deeper. This wasn't about your escape anymore. This was about what came next. "You opened the seal," the being said. "Now the world will remember." You backed away until your shoulders touched the wall. No, there must be a way to stop it. A way to seal this place again. The creature did not blink, did not move. Its roots twitched at the edges of its body like breath. Seals require sacrifice. as it was before, as it will be again. And then something clicked. The first guardian, the one the book had spoken of, the one who had given themselves to stop the bleeding, to slow the growth of whatever lived beneath the earth. They had not simply been consumed. They had offered themselves to become the lock, a living seal, a soul fused with root and soil. And now that seal was broken. You swallowed the rising panic and stepped forward, facing the creature, refusing to look away. Is that what you want from me? You want me to become what they were? The glow in its chest pulsed slowly. No, you already are. And in that moment your skin began to crawl. Not from fear, but from recognition. The mark you had once carried from the forest, it had never faded. You had thought it gone, thought the hunger had left you. But now the truth settled in your bones. You weren't free of the forest. You had brought a part of it with you. You looked down at your hands. Your fingertips shimmered faintly with that same pulsing orange light, the glow of embered root. Your veins tingled. Your heart beat in rhythm with the creature before you. You weren't just connected to the guardian. You were the next one. The creature extended an arm. Not to strike, not to pull you in, but to offer. It was not speaking anymore, not in words. The message now was deeper, rooted in instinct and memory. Take the place. Seal the gate. Let the world be safe again. But in doing so, become the root. Bind your soul to the earth. Become another forgotten statue beneath a forgotten town. Alive, but not living. A presence, a watcher, forever silent, forever still. You felt your breath shake. Behind you, the wall rumbled. A crack began to form. And through it, you heard the man's voice, faint but urgent. Are you in there? We can hear something. Are you okay? You turned, heart racing. The wall wasn't stone anymore. It had softened, become wood. Gnarled but breakable. A doorway trying to form. A way out. The creature stepped back toward the pit, watching. Waiting. To pass. Step into the root and seal what should never have stirred. Or escape, and carry the knowledge and perhaps the infection out into a world that had no idea what slept beneath its soil. One path saved the world. The other warned it. But either way, there would be no peace. Your fingers tightened into fists. Your feet felt heavy. The hum beneath your skin was louder now. What were you willing to become? What would you leave behind? And what would awaken if you chose wrong? The being did not move. It did not beg. It knew what came next. Now, it was your turn to decide. The air in the chamber was thick now, not just with dust or decay but with pressure. Ancient, mounting pressure that pushed against the walls, the floor, the inside of your skull. It felt like standing in the heart of a storm that hadn't broken yet, the air vibrating with the potential of catastrophe. The creature stood beside the pit, a silhouette of bark and ember, waiting. Watching. Silent. Not urging, not pleading. Simply existing. Like an echo from the world's beginning that had finally found a listener. Behind you, the wood-warped wall continued to crack, the faint pounding from the other side growing more urgent. You could hear the man's voice, closer now. We're getting through. Just hold on. Your breath came in shallow bursts. To pass. You took a step toward the pit. It was warm, almost deceptively so. A mist coiled lazily from the chasm. It sent earthy, ancient, and thick with memory. Looking down, you saw nothing but shifting dark and slow-glowing veins pulsing deep beneath the stone, like something alive, something waiting to be bound again. It wasn't a hunger anymore. It was a wound, and it had opened wide. Step in, the voice whispered in your mind. Become root. Become still. Become seal. Another step. But then a cry. The child. Muffled. Frightened. Your eyes flicked to the breaking wall. A beam of light now pierced through, and a second voice joined the first. The woman. Her tone strained and desperate. Please, we're coming. Your body tensed. That light, it meant freedom. Survival. The world open again. A path forward, unknown but full of possibility. The pit meant stillness. It meant finality. It meant giving everything, your mind, your voice, your future, to become part of the root. You would not die, but you would never speak again. Never walk. Never laugh. Never feel wind on your face or see sky again. You would become a memory, a myth. An eternal soul tangled in a secret place no one would know existed. The forest had marked you, but it had also chosen you. And now the choice was yours. Your knees trembled as you stepped back from the pit. No, you whispered aloud. The creature tilted its head, slow and solemn. Its hollow sockets pulsed. Then you carry it. Carry the wound. Carry the root. And suddenly the pulsing glow in your chest surged outward. The mark, the one you thought had faded, flared on your arms, on your palms, on the back of your neck. You cried out, staggering as the glow spread like fire beneath your skin. But it wasn't pain. Not quite. It was like your body was being rewritten. The seal would not be remade in the ground. It would be remade in you. The walls shuddered violently, the stones moaning like they were being torn apart. The crack widened. Fingers punched through the gaps. The man's arm, bloody and bruised, forced its way into the chamber. You turned, stumbling toward him, your limbs burning with unnatural heat. He grabbed you with both hands and with a final roar of effort, yanked you through the crumbling wall of roots and stone. The room collapsed behind you. You hit the ground hard in the next room, back in the cottage now. Your lungs seized on fresh air. The glow beneath your skin dimmed slightly but did not fade. The others were beside you, wild-eyed and breathless. The woman knelt. What happened in there? What is that on your arms? You tried to answer, but no words came out, because inside you something moved. A whisper, a memory, a rhythm not your own. The pulsing of roots, the echo of a sealed pit. The creature's voice lived inside your skull now. Not screaming, not hostile, simply waiting. The gate remains, but now you are its lock. The others helped you to your feet. You were shaking, feverish, but alive. Outside, dusk had begun to fall. The sky was a deepening violet, the wind cool and sharp with pine and old rain. The town remained silent behind you, but no longer watching. The weight of it had shifted. The seal was not remade, but relocated into you. As you stumbled from the house, the others close behind you looked back once. The cottage was already beginning to rot, the stones crumbling in unnatural ways, vines pushing through windows like veins through skin. Whatever was beneath it was sinking again, going back to sleep. But not forever, and not completely. You were the anchor now, the bearer of a wound the world didn't know it carried. You could still walk, still speak, still choose. But for how long? That night, you camped at the edge of the valley. The others built a fire. The child finally laughed again. The woman sat close, watching you with cautious hope. The man dozed nearby, his arm bandaged and eyes hollow with exhaustion. But you couldn't sleep. When you closed your eyes, you saw the pit, felt its pull. You were free of the forest. But the forest was not free of you. And somewhere, deep beneath the mountains, beneath the last dying roots of a wounded world, something was waiting to grow again. You didn't sleep. The fire burned low, casting long shadows on the damp forest floor where your group had made camp just outside the ruined town. The others were curled up near the flames, exhausted, silent, unaware. The man's arm lay in a rough sling. The woman sat with her back against a tree, arms wrapped around the child like a protective shield. Every now and then she stirred, her eyes opening to scan the darkness. But not once did she look toward you. Not directly. They all felt it now, even if they wouldn't say it aloud. Something in you had changed. No, not changed. Been rewritten. You stood at the edge of the firelight, your body aching as though you'd been carved from root and stone yourself. The glow that had flared beneath your skin in the chamber had faded, yes, but the sensation remained. A low, steady hum inside your bones. A rhythm. A pressure behind your eyes that pulsed like a second heartbeat. Each breath brought the scent of soil. Damp bark. Faint, smoky ash. You looked up toward the sky, where the trees thinned and a blood-tinged moon hung low behind torn clouds. Somewhere in the distance, a low wind blew through the branches, and you could swear you heard it whispering. Not words, not language, just intention, a presence. You stepped further into the forest, drawn by something unseen. Your boots sank into the softened earth, the trees parting just enough to let you pass. Behind you, the others slept on. As you walked, the forest grew darker, colder. There were no animal sounds here. No birds. No rustling. Only the occasional cracking of a limb overhead. A faint, settling groan from the deep woods. And the whisper, threading between the branches, curling around your thoughts like smoke. We remember you. You opened the way. We are not gone. We are beneath. You stopped at the base of a blackened tree, its trunk split down the middle as if struck by lightning. But there was no char, no fire marks. Just the gaping wound inside which something moved. You leaned in, drawn closer, not by curiosity but recognition. Inside the hollow trunk, the roots spiraled downward in impossible ways, winding and twisting like veins from a heart too large to fit in any creature. And far below them you saw it again, the pit. The one you left behind. But not sealed. Not closed. Breathing. You staggered back, gasping. The vision faded. The tree was once again empty. But now you understood. You hadn't sealed the pit. You had become the door. And the thing inside, it was learning you, studying, waiting, listening. You looked down at your arm, pulled back your sleeve. Beneath the skin, faint tendrils of root-like lines pulsed in your veins. Orange-red and dim, like embers buried under ash. You ran your hand over them, felt no pain. But they were spreading, slowly, quietly. You returned to camp before sunrise. The others hadn't moved. The fire had died to red coals. You sat alone, watching the smoke rise, curling upward into the gray morning light. The woman opened her eyes, looked at you, and said nothing. You both knew. As the days passed, you traveled north. The valley gave way to rising hills, the soil drier now, the trees thinner. You passed the shattered remains of an old stone bridge, crossed through abandoned farmland, and reached the outskirts of a village half swallowed by ivy and silence. The buildings stood, weathered but intact. There were signs of recent life, tools left out, smoke long dead in chimneys, but no people. Not a soul. Just the feeling. That same pressure in your skull. That same quiet whisper on the wind. It was spreading. In the evenings, when the others slept, you walked the forest alone. Roots stirred where they shouldn't. The wind moved in directions it had no right to. Once, you came upon a deer frozen in place, its eyes blackened, its body rigid, still breathing but unmoving, like it had been touched by something ancient and paralyzing. Watched you, then blinked, then fled. You realized the farther you moved from the town, the less alone you felt. Whatever had been beneath the pit was connected now, not just to you but through you, into the forest, into the land, into things that had no name for what was coming. One night, after a long march through a sunless glade, you sat apart from the group again. The child approached, small feet crunching in the leaves. You heard them before they spoke. "Are you okay?" You turned slowly. Their eyes were wide, afraid, but curious. Children always felt what adults refused to believe. You didn't want to lie, so you didn't speak at all. The child frowned. "You don't talk much anymore." They sat beside you anyway, held out a carved wooden animal, a rabbit, rough and chipped, but clearly handmade. "Mom said you're sick," the child said softly, "but I think you're scared." That struck harder than you expected. You stared at the rabbit in their small hands. A gift, a gesture. You took it slowly, nodded once. "Will it go away?" they asked. "The thing that's following you?" You looked up, and the forest answered for you. A distant boom, like thunder but wrong. Deeper, slower. Not from the sky but from beneath. The ground trembled, just for a moment, and then silence. Even the wind paused. You looked toward the hills ahead, and far away, silhouetted against the fading daylight, a tree was burning, but there was no fire, just light, pulsing from within the bark like veins, like what you saw in the creature, in the pit, in you. The child followed your gaze. "What's that?" You stood. The others had risen too, their faces pale, mouths slack. The woman reached for the child, pulling them close. The man's hand found his knife instinctively, and you felt the pull again, not from the forest, but from within. It wasn't waiting anymore. It was calling. The glowing tree called to you long before you stood beneath its boughs. Even as you led the others through the thinning forest, past ridgelines crusted with brittle roots and moss-blackened stones, you could feel its pulse rising through the ground with every step, steady, unnatural, intentional. It wasn't like you saw in the distance. It was a signal. The same pulse that echoed inside your body, that whispered in your dreams, that made your shadow flicker in firelight like it no longer belonged to you. And now, it was ahead. No one spoke during the climb. The woman kept the child close, one hand gripping the back of their coat like they might be snatched away at any second. The man kept glancing at you when he thought you weren't looking, watching your movements, tracking the distance between you and them. You couldn't blame him. The glow under your skin hadn't faded. In fact, it had grown stronger as you approached the tree, tiny strands of orange light coiling up your arms like ivy. You felt fevered, not in pain, but in human. You were changing and they could all see it now. By dusk you broke the tree-line. The hilltop had once been a grove, flat, soft, scattered with the stumps of trees long rotted. But in the center of it now stood the thing you had seen from miles away. It had once been a tree, tall, wide, ancient, but no longer green. Its bark was blackened and glossy like cooled magma, cracked with thin lines of burning amber that pulsed from its roots to its highest branches. No leaves, no birds, just light leaking from deep within the wood. And hanging from the limbs, like fruit on a dying vine, were objects. Cloth, blessed, carved wood, bones, totems, offerings. You stepped forward, unable to stop yourself. The tree's roots stretched out across the ground like grasping fingers, and as you crossed into the circle of its reach, the humming in your bones intensified. You were inside something now. A radius, a presence. You could feel the others hesitate at your back. The man called out, "Don't go near it." You didn't answer, because the tree was already inside your head. We knew you would come. The vessel always returns to the source. But this time, it is awake. Your knees buckled. You dropped to the dirt, gasping, clutching your chest. The tree pulsed, glowed, in response, and the roots shifted beneath your palms like muscle. The forest didn't just remember you, recognized you. You weren't carrying a piece of it anymore. You were it. The others moved closer. You heard the child's voice, soft, scared. "What's wrong with them?" The woman grabbed your shoulder. "Hey, stay with us." You opened your eyes and saw a different world. Not the hilltop, not the grove, but a deep black space beneath the earth, where roots coiled through the bones of forgotten giants, and blood fell like rain from a ceiling made of bark and teeth. You stood in a vast chamber, a memory made of dirt and centuries. At its center, another tree, larger, dead, twisted in on itself like a screen carved in wood. You blinked, and you were back on the hilltop. But something had changed. The glowing tree had begun to move, not in any natural way. Its branches creaked and turned slowly as though they were stretching. Its trunk cracked wider down the center, splitting open like a mouth, and inside, buried in glowing amber, was a figure. A humanoid shape, bound by roots. Eyes closed, face serene. It looked like you. No, it looked like the version of you that might have been had you chosen the pit. The guardian. So, silent, still. The child screamed. The woman staggered back, and the man drew his knife. You rose to your feet. "What is this?" the woman asked. "What is it doing?" You couldn't find words. The presence inside you, once dormant, was now rising. It whispered behind your eyes, coiling down your spine. The seal failed. The hunger was broken. The root grew restless. You're the branch. You're the vessel. But you must choose again. And there it was. The same choice. But now, it wasn't between sealing or escaping. Now it was sealing or unleashing. The figure inside the tree, the echo of the guardian you refused to become, was not whole. Cracks ran through its body. Something behind the amber writhed. A second shape. A second presence. One that wanted out. If you walked into the split trunk now, you could bind yourself to the echo. Seal it again. Stop the root from growing. But if you didn't, if you walked away, the thing inside the tree wouldn't stay hidden. It would spread. It would root itself in the bones of forests, in rivers, in rain, in the minds of those too close to dream it away. You felt the man's hand on your arm trying to pull you back. "We should run. We should burn this place. We can't let it live." The child cried softly. The woman stood frozen, eyes locked on the figure in the amber. You took a step forward. The tree pulsed brighter. The cracks deepened. The other inside it stirred. And in your gut, you knew the force inside was older than hunger, older than rot. It wasn't born of malice or revenge. It was born of balance, of overcorrection. A world that had been wounded so deeply by humanity's carelessness that the land had responded with a will of its own. And now, with no hunger to anchor it, that will was no longer focused on one forest. It was spreading. You have been marked. You carry the seed. Plant it or bury it. The wind died. The tree stopped moving, waiting. You stood at the edge of the roots, your heartbeat in sync with the pulse of the amber light. This was your moment, not just to choose the future, but to choose what you were going to become. And behind you, the world held its breath. You stood at the edge of the glowing tree's shadow, its open trunk yawning wide like the mouth of a living cathedral, the pulsing amber within brighter now, deeper, almost frantic. Inside, the figure, the guardian that could have been you, hung motionless in its prison of cracked light and twitching root. Behind that figure, deeper still, was movement. A second form, half submerged in the glow, its edges unfinished, its outline twitching unnaturally like a thing still being born. A thing remembering how to be. The others watched from behind you. The man's grip on his knife was tight, white-knuckled. The woman held the child close, whispering to them, trying to shield their eyes. They didn't understand. They couldn't. Because what was growing now wasn't just a force of nature. Was you. You took a step forward into the tree's radius, and the bark moaned underfoot, shifting and splintering with slow, creaking pain. As you passed through the invisible line between the forest and the tree's domain, the glow beneath your skin brightened, rising up your neck and pulsing at your temples. The hum in your bones became a roar. You felt your heartbeat skip, your vision narrow, your breath catch in your throat. This is the last breath before rebirth. Choose. Seed or seal. And then the choice fractured. Because it was never about just two paths. It was never that simple. The guardian you saw, the one sealed in the amber, was not you. It was a memory of the first who made the choice. The one who sacrificed, who fed the pit with their soul. But you had broken the cycle. You had walked away once. You had survived it. And that made you something new. Something dangerous. A third option bloomed, terrible and trembling, just beyond your reach. You didn't have to seal it. You didn't have to spread it. You could become it. Shape it. You were the vessel now. What if you didn't run from it? What if you didn't fight it? What if you embraced it fully without surrendering yourself to silence? What if you gave it a voice? The forest didn't want destruction. It wanted to be heard. And you could speak for it. You closed your eyes, stepping fully into the tree's base, 1 foot into the light. The amber was warm, impossibly bright, and yet somehow welcoming. You reached your hand out, fingers brushing the hardened glow surrounding the silent guardian. It cracked at your touch, not violently but like ice melting after a long, long winter. The presence inside stirred. It didn't resist. It was waiting for your decision. You are the branch. Grow in our image, or prune us back to silence. Behind you, the man shouted your name. The woman begged, "Don't go in." And the child whispered, "Please come back." Your breath hitched. For a moment, you could see the world beyond this forest. Towns unaware of the root beneath their foundations. Mountains trembling with unseen veins of hunger. A storm not of weather, but of awakening. And at its center, you could walk back now. Rejoin them. Carry the mark forever, yes, but not let it grow. You could step forward and change everything. Your eyes snapped open. You stepped into the amber. The guardian figure shattered in an instant, dissolving into light and ash. The second shape behind it screamed, not aloud but within you, a soundless roar that filled your skull with pressure and flame. Your body went cold, then hot, then empty, and then full. The tree pulsed once, twice, then cracked apart from root to crown, splitting open as a burst of orange light surged into the sky like a column of fire. The force of it threw the others back, sent leaves swirling, bent the trees for miles around. Birds fled from branches. The earth itself groaned. And then, silence. When the others woke, you were gone. The tree was no longer glowing, but it had changed. Its bark was white now, bone pale and smooth. Its branches curled upward like hands in prayer. And at its base, where you had stood, there was a hollow, a perfectly round space in the roots, softly pulsing, as though something had taken root and gone to sleep. The woman approached first, tears in her eyes. The man stood behind her, holding the child. None of them spoke, but they felt it. You weren't gone. You were becoming. The forest around them had changed too. Not twisted, not corrupted, but alive. Alert. It watched. It listened. Not with menace, but with memory. And far beneath the roots, where no human had ever walked, the force that had once been mindless and cruel, now had a voice. And it was yours. Epilogue, 1 year later. They say no one goes near the valley anymore. The path into the forest is grown over. The signs have faded. The buildings of the town collapsed slowly, one by one, until nothing remained but outlines in the moss. But sometimes travelers swear they hear something at night in the trees. A hum. A whisper. And if you sit very still, you might hear the branches creak with words. A warning. A memory. A name. Yours. Because you chose the forest. And the forest chose you back. The end.